18 people had locked themselves inside the bunker. There were exactly 18 spots. And he stood outside in minus 61-degree weather, pounding his fist against the door behind which his fiancée was huddled. Over the intercom, the commander called him brother, and a second later, he crossed him off the list of the living. Choi Young-ho pounds on the airlock door of bunker B-17 and can no longer feel at what moment his skin turned into a black crust. 12 centimeters of steel separate him from the 18 people to whom he entrusted his life. Among them is the commander. Among them is his fiancée. The intercom clicks. Captain Park Do-jin's voice creeps into his ears like warm poison. 18 seats, 18 people. Math doesn't lie. And that word, brother. A second before crossing them off the list of the living, Young-ho strikes again. The bone in his middle finger cracks and folds inward, but there is no pain. His nerves are already dead. Then So-yoon speaks. Her voice trembles, but her words come out steady. Do-jin promised to let her parents in, and she had no choice. She doesn't apologize. She explains, as if she were talking about a bus transfer and not his death. Young-ho remembers how 3 hours ago he carried a colleague's 3-year-old daughter out of the burning hospital. The girl slipped a cinnamon lollipop into his pocket for saving her. The taste of cinnamon still lingers on his tongue, and it's warmer than anything else left on the outside. Laughter comes through the intercom. Thin, wet. Junior Sergeant Lim Ji-soo tells him to die with dignity. He adds the word hero and laughs again. Young-ho doesn't remember the voice, not the words, the frequency of the laughter. His body slides down the door. His back presses against the steel, and the steel draws the last warmth from his spine. At the 20-minute mark, his legs give out. At 30, his arms. At 40, his heart stops. He doesn't close his eyes. They freeze open. The last thing he says crystallizes in the air as a white cloud and falls to the ground as an icy flake. He will return for each one, by name, one by one. Then, darkness. The darkness lasts exactly 1 minute. At the 41st minute, Young-ho opens his eyes and sees the ceiling. White, warm, no frost. He lies in a room with no walls, only light, even like in an operating room, but without lamps. 21 degrees. He knows the number not because he sees a thermometer, but because his body tells him so, as if someone had sewn a sensor under his ribs. Young-ho sits up. He looks at his hands. His black, frostbitten fingers are intact. Pink. The broken finger stands straight as if it had never cracked. He clenches his fist, unclenches it. It works. It burns on his left shoulder blade. Not pain, but a presence, as if someone had placed a hand on his back and never removed it. Young-ho pulls off his jacket, lifts his sweater, turns his neck. A hexagon glows on his shoulder blade. The birthmark he was born with now pulses a dull blue. In the air before his face, a number hangs. Not a screen, not a hologram, just a number written with a finger on fogged-up glass. UY1. Anchor level 1. He doesn't know what it means. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know if he's alive or dead. But he knows 3 names. Park Do-jin, So-yoon, Lim Gi-soo. And he knows the frequency of Gi-soo's laughter. That's enough. He stands up, takes a step. The floor is solid and warm. The room has no boundaries, but it has a bottom. He reaches out his hand, and his fingers pass through the air. But somewhere at the edge of his perception, he senses the cold. That very one, minus 61. The world outside exists. He feels it the way a diver feels the surface above his head. A line flashes next to the number. Absorption mass, 50 grams. Thermal echo radius, 200 meters. He doesn't understand. He reaches out into the void and clenches his fingers. A lighter appears in his palm. His lighter. A cheap gas one with a red casing. The one that was in his breast pocket when he was dying. 38 grams. He didn't take it out. Didn't reach for his pocket. He just wanted it. And here it is. The lighter clicks. The flame is real. Orange. Steady. Young-ho stares at the fire and thinks of the B-17 door, of Dojin's voice, of the word brother, of how Yuna said his name with the intonation of a receipt. Young-ho, not Young-ho-ya, without the suffix, without tenderness, as if she were signing a document. Done. Written off. He closes the lighter, puts it in his pocket, looks at the number. UYA1. 50 grams. 200 meters. That's not enough. That's monstrously little. But yesterday he didn't even have that. Yesterday he didn't even have a pulse. Young-ho sits down on the warm floor. He closes his eyes and begins to count. Not minutes, not hours, names. Park Do-jin, So-yoon, Lim Gi-soo, then 15 more. Everyone who was behind the door. Everyone who stayed silent while Gi-soo laughed. Everyone who breathed warm air while his fingers turned black. 18 names, 18 debts. Ouya 1 is not enough. But time here runs at a ratio of 6-to-1. An hour outside is 6 hours inside. And now he has nothing but time and a list. 6 hours had passed inside the border, but only 1 had passed outside. Young-ho hadn't slept. He had been walking. The room without walls turned out not to be a room, but a space that grew with every step he took. When he walked south, the floor beneath his feet grew slightly colder. When he went north, it was slightly warmer, as if the boundary were breathing, as if it had a pulse, and that pulse matched his own. He counted his steps. 1,200 to the spot where the cold began to burn his feet. 1,200 in the other direction, to the spot where the warmth became thick as soup. Between these points lay roughly 2.5 kilometers of empty, warm nothingness. His world. His and his alone. Ouya 1. 50 grams. Young-ho crouched down and placed his palm on the floor. He closed his eyes. He reached out. There, outside, a 200-meter radius. He sensed the thermal signatures of objects, dull spots in an icy world. Every object that retained even a drop of residual heat flickered for him like a firefly in the dark. The lighter he'd taken left a hole. The outside of his jacket pocket was empty, and that emptiness rang out. He reached his fingers deeper, found it. Small spots. A nail. 9 grams. Young-ho clenched his fingers, and the nail was in his hand. Rusty, crooked, warm. A number flashed in the air. UYA1. Cycle mass. 11 grams out of 50 used. 39 left. He reached out again. A bolt. 14 grams. Taken. 25 left. A coin. 6 grams. Taken. 19. Each item settled into his palm with a light click, as if the boundary were saying, yes. Young-ho piled the trash into a heap on the floor. A nail, a bolt, a coin, a battery, 3 buttons, a lighter, a dead man's trash. But after 6 hours of internal time, the cycle reset. The number flashed, 50 grams again. He understood. Every hour on the outside, the limit resets. 6 hours on the inside is 1 cycle. 1 cycle is 50 grams. In a day on the outside, he could haul in 50 grams 24 times. 1,200 grams a day. 120 kilos. Trash. But that was today. Tomorrow, there would be more. He knew it. He could feel it. Ouya wasn't growing from consuming mass. It was growing from something else, from intention, from the heat inside, from how badly he wanted to return. At 12 o'clock internal time, the number flickered. OOYA2. Cycle mass. 110 grams. Radius, 210 meters. He hadn't done anything. He just wanted to. He just never stopped wanting. At the 18th hour, he sensed something new outside. Not trash. Warmth. Alive. Faint as a dying candle, but alive. Someone was dying 200 meters from where his body lay. Young-ho reached for that warmth and pulled his hand back. Pain flashed through his head, sharp, like a nail in his temple. The boundary said no, not like that. The boundary said it was too soon. UYA2 isn't enough for the living. The living weigh more than a bolt. The living have a soul. Young-ho remembered. He reached past it, found something else. A knife, a folding knife, 80 grams. He took it. Then a spoon, then a pencil stub. Trash, trash, trash of the dead world, but trash in the warmth. 30 hours later, in his own time, he felt growth again. UYA3, cycle mass, 200 grams, radius, 225 meters. Young-ho sat down. He looked at the pile of junk, nails, bolts, coins, a knife, a lighter, a spoon, batteries. If anyone had seen this from the outside, they would have seen a dead man in an empty, bright room sitting in front of a handful of trash and smiling. But no one saw. Young-ho was alone, and his smile wasn't warm. It was an accountant's smile. He was calculating. If the UYA grows every 12 to 15 hours of internal time and each level doubles the mass, then by UYA 6, he'll be able to pull 3 or 4 kilos per cycle. By UYA 10, a ton. By the 20th, he didn't know, but he wanted to find out. 48th hour, UYA 4, cycle mass, 420 grams, radius, 240 meters. Young-ho stood up. He walked to the southern edge of his space, to where the cold was. He placed his palm on the invisible wall between the border and the world, and peered out. He didn't see it with his eyes. He saw it with his whole body, an infrared map. Blue. Dead. Minus 58 degrees Celsius on the surface. Ice on the sidewalks 3 centimeters thick. Cars frozen into the asphalt. Bodies. Many bodies. Cold. Dark. Invisible to his radar because there was no heat left in them. But here and there, something flickered. Bunkers. Basements. Generators. Small islands of orange in a blue ocean. 240 meters wasn't enough. He could see only the nearest block. But he saw enough. 170 meters to the west, 2 heat signatures were moving. People. Alive. Armed. He could sense the metal on their bodies. Assault rifles, each weighing about 3.5 kilograms. That wouldn't be enough for him. 420 grams per cycle isn't 3.5 kilos, but he could take something smaller from them. A magazine. 300 grams. Or not. Not now. Young-ho withdrew his hand, stepped back from the edge, returned to his pile of trash, sat down. He closed his eyes. The taste of cinnamon on his tongue had long since faded, but he remembered it so clearly it was as if the lollipop were still melting in his mouth. The little girl. 3 years old. He'd carried her out of the hospital. She'd slipped the lollipop into his pocket with her warm little fingers and said it was for saving her. She's in bunker B-17 right now, behind that door, with those people, with Dojin, who counts people by the head and crosses out the surplus. Young-ho clenched his fist. His nails dug into his palm. There was no pain. The border knew no pain, but it knew rage. The number in the air flickered. UYA4. 420 grams. Not enough. Monstrously insufficient. But just yesterday he was a corpse by the door, and today he sits in the warmth and counts grams. Tomorrow he'll be counting kilograms. The day after tomorrow, tons. Patience. The list isn't going anywhere. The names won't fade. On the third day of external time, which was the 18th day inside the Young-ho border, he stood by the south wall and looked out. UYA6. Cycle mass. 3 kilograms, 800 grams. Thermal echo radius, 270 meters. He had stopped collecting trash. Trash was a stage, a school. Now he perceived the world differently. Every shadow, every infrared trace, every gram of heat trapped in an object or a body. 260 meters to the south stood a ransacked gas station, a concrete box with smashed windows and a torn-down sign. Inside, 2 heat signatures, large ones, men, and 1 small one, faint, fading, a child. Young-ho pressed his palm against the wall. He listened. He couldn't hear any sounds, but he could feel the vibrations. Blows, a scream, metal against bone. 2 adults were beating a child. He could feel the small heat signature twitch with every blow and grow a fraction of a degree colder. Young-ho let go of the wall. He looked at his hands. Pink, intact, warm. 3 kilograms, 800 grams. Theoretically, he could carry a living child, but a child isn't a bolt. A child has a soul. And the boundary had warned him on UYA2, a knife to the temple. He was currently at level 6, a 4-level difference. Would it be enough? He didn't know, but the spot was fading. Young-ho stepped through the wall. It felt like diving into icy water, only without the water. The world collapsed into infrared outlines. He existed in both places at once, his body in the boundary, shadow outside. A translucent silhouette in black, with a temperature of plus 21 degrees all around. The frost on the ground beneath his feet melted and immediately froze again. A 10-meter circle of warmth in a world where it was minus 58. He reached the gas station in 30 seconds. He entered through a hole in the wall. 2 men stood over a bound teenager, a boy of 15 or 16. His face was... His hands were tied to a pipe with wire. A plastic canister lay at his feet. 5 liters of diesel fuel. That's what this was about. The looters turned around. The first one was burly, a sheepskin coat, a fur-lined hat, a 5.45 caliber Kalashnikov assault rifle slung over his shoulder. The whole setup weighed about 4 kilos, a bit much. The second one was skinny, a knife in his hand, a pea jacket, no heavy weapons. The big one looked at Young-ho and didn't get it. He saw a translucent man in clean clothes, with no frost on his eyebrows and an aura that made the frost on the floor evaporate. He told his partner it was a hallucination, oxygen deprivation. He said that happens when you breathe at minus 50. The brain projects images. The skinny one agreed. He laughed and turned back to the boy. Young-ho looked at their truck outside the window, an old military comrades. The heat signature was clear. The engine was still warm. Weight, 8 tons. Not over the limit. But the truck had a shadow, an infrared shadow, and that shadow had a point of contact with the ground. A narrow strip under the undercarriage where the engine's heat met the cold concrete. Young-ho reached for that strip. 3 kilograms, 800. He couldn't take the whole truck. But he wasn't taking the truck. He was touching the shadow. A shadow is a projection. A projection weighs nothing. The boundary didn't take the mass, but the anchor point. The truck vanished. 8 tons of steel and diesel just vanished, as if someone had pressed delete. The big looter fell silent. His mouth opened. His eyes widened. He turned toward where the truck had been. Emptiness. Concrete. Frost. Young-ho touched the shadow of the assault rifle. The rifle vanished from the looter's hands. The sling snapped against his empty shoulder. The big man recoiled. He looked at his hands, then at Young-ho. His mouth was still open. Young-ho touched the shadows of their clothes. The sheepskin coat vanished. The pea coat vanished. Hats, boots, gloves, everything. The two men stood naked in a room where the temperature was -58. Their skin turned white in a second. In the second, they screamed. In the third, Young-ho leaned toward the boy and touched the wire. The wire vanished. The boy's hands dropped. Young-ho looked at the looters. They were shivering. Their skin was turning blue. The big one tried to say something, but his jaw was chattering so hard that the words wouldn't come out. Young-ho said 2 words, "Ouya, 6." Then he added, "Just a warm-up." His voice was calm, steady, like a newsreader announcing the temperature. The boy looked up at him. His eyes were huge. His split lip was trembling, not from the cold, from what he had seen. Young-ho held out his hand to him. The boy grabbed it, and the world collapsed. The boy found himself in the border. Pain struck Young-ho in the temple like a hammer. Not a nail, a hammer. He fell to his knee. A number flashed in the air. Resident 1. Soul mass, stable. The pain subsided after 4 seconds. The border was in pain, but it accepted him. Young-ho exhaled. The boy sat on the warm floor and turned his head. He looked at the light, at the warmth, at the absence of wind. Then he looked at Young-ho. He asked what it was. Young-ho said it was a house. The boy asked whose. Young-ho replied that it was his. The boy introduced himself as Im Shi-hyun, 16 years old. He had survived alone for 3 weeks after the outbreak. His parents had died in the first hour. He had hidden in basements and sewers. His hearing was like a bat's. He could hear footsteps 2 floors away and breathing through the wall. That's why he lasted 3 weeks where adults didn't even make it 3 days. Young-ho listened. He was silent. Then he asked if Shi-hyun wanted to stay here in the warmth or go back outside. Shi-hyun looked at him for a very long time. Then he said he would stay, and added that if Young-ho ever went to kill those who did to people what those two had done, he wanted to help. Young-ho nodded. There was one more name on the list. No, not on the list of debtors. On another list. The one he didn't yet know how to name. Shi-hyun didn't sleep for the first 12 hours inside the boundary. He walked barefoot on the warm floor, touched walls that weren't there, and looked around every 10 seconds like a little animal that had just been let out of its cage. Young-ho didn't interfere. He sat by the south wall and worked. On the 7th day of external time, that's 42 days of internal time, UY9, cycle mass, 120 kilograms, radius, 295 meters. The space of the boundary had grown. Now it stretched 4 kilometers in every direction. Empty, warm, waiting. Young-ho was filling it, methodically, like a sergeant. He spent the first cycle on tools, a hammer, a crowbar, wrenches. The second on medicine, a first aid kit from a wrecked ambulance in an alley, bandages, iodine, syringes. The third on food, canned goods from a vending machine in the basement of an office building. Every 6 hours of internal time, the limit reset, and he'd start again. 120 kilos per cycle, 4 cycles a day, 480 kilos a day. After a week of external time, 3 rows of shelves crammed with canned goods and tools stood in the border. A warehouse, his first warehouse. Si-hyun helped. He sorted. He counted. The boy had a phenomenal memory for numbers. He memorized where everything was at a glance. Young-ho gave him a task: to sit by the south wall, to listen, to report. Si-hyun pressed his ear against the boundary between the worlds and listened to the outside world from a distance that Young-ho's thermal vision couldn't reach. The boy could hear farther than Young-ho could see. On the 4th day, Si-hyun reported 120 meters to the northeast. A building, a former clinic, on fire. Someone is screaming. A woman's voice. Young-ho didn't hesitate. He stepped outside. A translucent shadow in black, plus 21 aura. The frost on the ground evaporates within a 10-meter radius. The clinic was burning with that strange, dim fire that appeared after the flash. Not an orange flame, but a red-blue. The combustion temperature was lower than usual. The fire wasn't hot, but rather poisonous. The smoke was black and thick as oil. Inside, on the second floor, behind a collapsed beam, a woman lay. Her belly, large, pregnant. Next to her was a man's body, cold, dead. She was clutching a medical bag to her chest. Young-ho touched the beam. The beam vanished. The woman raised her head. She saw him. She wasn't afraid. She didn't have the strength to be afraid. She said she was a doctor, a surgeon, that the clinic had been set on fire for the medicine, that her husband had been dead for 2 hours, that she couldn't stand up. Young-ho reached out his hand. She grabbed it. Pain in her temple, intense, like a steel pin. 2 residents in 4 days. The border protested, but accepted her. Dr. Jong-sa-ron, 41 years old, a surgeon, 7 months pregnant. When she found herself in the border and saw the warmth and light and a floor without blood, she cried for 2 hours. Then she stood up. She wiped her face and asked where the operating room was. Young-ho said there wasn't one. Jong-sa-ron looked at the shelves with canned goods and first aid kits. She looked at Si-hyun, who was sorting bandages. She looked at Young-ho and said it would be fine. Give her 3 days. In 3 internal days, she organized a medical station from what was available. A table made of boxes, light from a lighter and a flashlight, bandages, iodine, a scalpel that Young-ho had brought from the same clinic. She examined Si-hyun. She set his broken ribs, which the boy hadn't mentioned a word about. She examined Young-ho for a long time, in silence. Then she said his heart wasn't beating. Young-ho nodded. He said Jong-sa-ron asked how he was alive then. Young-ho replied that he didn't know, but that it didn't matter. She wrote this down in a notebook she'd made from wrapping paper and a pencil stub. First entry, Subject 1, Choi Young-ho, age 28, no pulse. Body temperature 21.0, identical to ambient temperature. Birthmark on the left shoulder blade, hexagonal in shape. Blue spectrum luminescence. Intensity correlates with anchor level. She didn't know what an anchor level was, but she saw a number in the air, AU9, and she intended to understand. Day 9. External time, internal time, 54th day, AU10. Cycle mass, 1 ton. Radius, 300 meters. The number changed and Young-ho stood up. 1 ton, per cycle. Every 6 internal hours. 4 tons per day of external time. He walked over to the south wall and looked outside. 300 meters to the west stood a grocery store. The sign had been torn down, but he could see the heat signature of the refrigerators that had been running on the emergency generator just 3 days ago. The generator had died. The refrigerators were cooling down, but the food hadn't frozen solid yet. Meat, grains, bottled water. There were tons of it inside. Tons of food. Young-ho reached out. He touched the shadow of the store. He pulled. The walls shook. The shelves shook, but they didn't budge. A ton per cycle isn't enough for an entire store. He took a shelf. 1. With canned goods and grains. 780 kilos. The shelf appeared in the border with a crash, and the cans rolled across the warm floor. Si-hyun jumped. Jong-sa-ron dropped her notebook. Young-ho looked at the shelf, at the cans, at the bags of rice. Then he looked at the number in the air. UYA-10, a ton. He remembered how 4 days ago his limit had been 50 grams and he'd been hauling nails. Now he's hauling shelves. In a week, he'll be hauling trucks. In a month. He didn't know what would happen in a month, but Do-jin would find out. Names don't fade. The list is waiting. On the 11th day, Young-ho swallowed the entire Lomart supermarket in Incheon. UYA-14, cycle mass, 5 tons. Thermal echo radius, 3 kilometers, 200 meters. He sensed the building from 2 kilometers away, a huge thermal spot in an icy desert. A former shopping center at the intersection of 2 highways. The walls were intact. The roof was intact. The generator on the roof was still running on diesel. Inside, 40 thermal points. People. They had barricaded themselves inside and were burning furniture to keep from freezing. There was enough food for 2 days. Then hunger. Then the cold. Then silence. Young-ho arrived at night. Outside night is a relative term because the sun is now a dim red disk on the horizon and there is almost no difference between day and night. But people sleep out of habit. He stood in front of the building, a translucent shadow, a black coat, hands in his pockets, plus 21 degrees, an aura, and a circle of melted frost that now stretched not 10 but 15 meters. Si-hyun stood beside him. Young-ho had let him out for an hour. The boy was bundled up in 3 jackets and listening. It was quiet inside the building. Just the hum of the generator and snoring. A guard at the entrance. One. With a rifle. Young-ho touched the shadow of the building. The entire building. 5 tons per cycle. The Lomart supermarket weighed more than 5 tons. Much more. But he didn't take the concrete and steel, he took the contents, the shelves, the goods, the generator, the fuel, the furniture, the clothes, everything inside the walls, layer by layer, cycle by cycle, 5 tons. A 6-hour break inside, an hour outside, another 5 tons. 4 hours had passed outside, 24 inside the boundary. Young-ho had pulled everything out. 20 tons of goods, 4 cycles, shelves of food, clothing, tools, medicines, the generator, 300 liters of diesel. Everything appeared in the boundary with a muffled sound like a breath. The boundary's space grew with every absorption. Now it stretched for 8 kilometers, an entire district, warm, bright, filled with good things. But the people inside the supermarket woke up within empty walls. A concrete box with nothing. No food, no clothes, no generator, no heat. Minus 56 inside the building and falling. They screamed. They thrashed about. The guard fired at the wall in terror. 40 people in a concrete box without a single item. Young-ho listened through the wall of the boundary. Si-hyun stood nearby and said nothing. Then Young-ho reached out and began to select. He sensed each of the 40, their thermal signature, breathing rate, body mass, age based on bone density, which he sensed through the infrared spectrum. He chose 6. An engineer, an electrician, a cook, 2 teenagers with quick reflexes, and an old man who, judging by the heat signature of his hands, was a gunsmith. Their shadows flickered. 6 people vanished from the concrete box and appeared in the boundary. 6 jabs of pain in his temple, one after another. Young-ho fell to one knee, blood from his nose, hot, scarlet. Jung Saran rushed to him. She screamed that it was impossible, that 6 at once was madness, that the border wasn't made of rubber. The number in the air flickered. Residents, 8. Limit on Uya, 14. Around 30. There was room. But the pain told him otherwise. The pain told him that every new resident was a piece of his consciousness given up for rent. 6 pieces in 4 seconds. As if 6 pages had been torn from his head. He remembered everything. But not. Slightly slower. It took a fraction of a second longer to recall his mother's name. Then he remembered. But that fraction of a second was a warning. 6 new residents stood in the middle of the boundary, staring at the warm light and the shelves and at the man with blood under his nose who was rising from his knees. No one understood what had happened. One of the teenagers was crying. The electrician felt the floor and muttered that it was impossible. The old armorer stood upright and looked silently at Young-ho. Then he nodded slowly, as if he understood everything. Young-ho wiped the blood with the back of his hand and looked at them. 8 residents, a surgeon, a scout, an engineer, an electrician, a cook, 2 teenagers, a gunsmith, and 22 living, empty cells. He could let in another 22 people until the limit on this level. But each one would come at a cost. Each would bite off a piece of his memory and his very self. That was the price. The debt of the border. Mercy is expensive. Hatred is cheap. 34 people remained in a concrete box with no walls, no belongings, and no heat. Young-ho didn't take them. He had made a choice.
6 out of 40, just as Dojin had chosen 18 and crossed him out. Young-ho stood in the warmth and thought about it. He thought for a long time. 3 internal hours. Then he dismissed the thought. He wasn't Dojin. Dojin had crossed him out for convenience. Young-ho had chosen the 6 for survival. There is a difference. There has to be. After a day of external time, the rumor spread. Young-ho didn't hear it himself, but Shi-hyun did. The boy would go out into the physical world for an hour, press his ear against the walls, and listen. The survivors from Lomart, the 34 he hadn't taken, were telling the story. At night, everything had vanished. Furniture, food, the generator, people. 6 people vanished into thin air. A ghost, a cannibal. It devours people. It takes them and devours them. The rumor spread through Incheon, then through Seoul. A cannibal ghost, invisible, hungry. It steals warmth and people. Young-ho listened to Shi-hyun's report and remained silent. Let them be afraid. Fear is currency. Fear is a wall that doesn't need to be built. But someone else was listening too. 400 kilometers to the south, in the Blue Salt Clan enclave, a woman wearing thermal vision goggles sat at a desk reading an intercepted radio message from Incheon. Son Hwa-yeon, 34 years old, analyst. She read the report twice. Then she took out a blank sheet of paper. She wrote the title. Object unknown. Anomaly type unknown. Preliminary assessment. Object anchor level based on circumstantial data. 12 to 15. She underlined the number 15. Her hand didn't tremble. For now. She'll start trembling later. Son Hwa-yeon sat in the Azure Salt Clan's bunker and reread the 3rd report from Incheon. The 14th day after the flare. The eyewitness accounts all agreed on one thing. Objects vanish without a trace. People vanish without a trace. A thermal anomaly within a 15-meter radius of the point of contact. Hwa-yeon took off her thermal vision goggles and wiped the lenses. Her hands were steady. She had been dealing with anomalies for 6 years and had never seen anything like this, but panic was a luxury an analyst could not afford without results. She wrote her 4th report. Recommendation: dispatch a field team to Incheon. Priority highest. The response was immediate. Azure Salt headquarters assigned her 2 operatives and a satellite thermal imager with enough battery life for 16 hours of operation. Not much, but enough to get started. Meanwhile, 400 kilometers to the north, Young-ho was working. Day 15, UY-16, cycle mass, 8 tons, thermal echo radius, 4 kilometers. The boundary had expanded to the size of a small town. 20 square kilometers of warm, empty space illuminated by a soft light with no source. Young-ho divided it into sectors. North, residential. Here stood beds salvaged from a hotel, mattresses, blankets, 8 sleeping spots, and another 30 empty ones. Western, storage, shelving from Lomart, canned goods, grains, water, diesel in canisters, tools. Southern, Dr. Jung Sa-ron's medical station. She had expanded it. Now there was a real operating table there, not one made of boxes.
Young-ho had found it in a ruined hospital in Pufyeon and hauled it out in a single trip. Jung Sa-ran stood over the table and stroked the stainless steel surface with an expression Young-ho had previously seen only on people who had encountered a relative they'd believed to be dead. The eastern sector was empty. Young-ho left it alone. He knew why this sector would be needed. Soon. On the 16th day, Si-hyun returned from reconnaissance and reported, "Bunker B-17 is expanding! Dojin had seized the adjacent underground parking garage and connected it to the main bunker. The population had grown from 18 to 60. Dojin was taking people in, but not for free." The men worked 3 8-hour shifts on the generator. They pedaled, literally. The bunker's generator ran on diesel, but the diesel was running out, so Dojin ordered bicycle dynamos to be hooked up. People pedaled to keep from freezing. Women pay in a different way. Si-hyun didn't say how. He lowered his eyes. Young-ho didn't ask. He knew. Dojin was building a small empire, a small state with a population of 60 souls where he is king, judge, and executioner, just like in the textbook. Every tyrant starts with 18 loyal followers and grows from there. Young-ho listened to the report and didn't move. He sat on the floor of the border with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. His fingers rested on his knees. His breathing was steady. From the outside, he looked like a man meditating. But Jung Sa-ran, standing 3 meters away, saw something else. She saw how the hexagon on his shoulder blade pulsed faster with every word Si-hyun spoke. Blue light shone through the fabric of his shirt. When Si-hyun finished, Young-ho opened his eyes. He asked one thing, where was Yuna? Si-hyun answered, in the central room of the bunker, next to Dojin. A collar, a chain, 5 feet. She can reach the cot and the bucket, that's all. Young-ho nodded. He closed his eyes again. A number in the air, UYA16. He did the math. To absorb the entire B-17 bunker, he needed at least level 30. Walls, generators, people, all at once. He could act now. Pull objects out piece by piece. Take the generator, take the fuel. Leave Dojin in the dark and cold. But that would kill 60 people who are innocent. 60 for 1. Dojin's math. No, Young-ho won't be Dojin. He'll take the bunker whole. People inside, Dojin outside. But for that, he needs a level and time. He has time. 6 to 1. Day 17. Young-ho stepped out into the physical world for the first time on a night mission. Not for supplies, for a man. 2 kilometers south of his anchor point, in the basement of a destroyed shopping mall, sat a 33-year-old man with a rifle and 4 corpses. The corpses were fresh. The man was unharmed. He sat with his back to the wall, staring at a single point. Young-ho approached, a semi-transparent shadow, an aura of warmth. The man raised his rifle and took aim. Finger on the trigger, eyes empty, not frightened, empty. Young-ho asked who these 4 were. The man replied that they were people from the Blackstone clan, that he too was a member of the Blackstone clan, a mercenary sniper, that he had been ordered to shoot a family who refused to hand over their thermocapsules, a family of 5, 3 children, that instead he shot his own group, 4 of them, and now he was waiting for the 5th, himself. Young-ho asked his name, Kang Tae-rim, 33 years old, former mercenary sniper, now a deserter, bounty, 20 liters of diesel. Young-ho asked if he wanted to die. Tae-rim replied that he did, but he couldn't pull the trigger because his finger wouldn't obey him, and that infuriated him more than anything else. Young-ho held out his hand. Tae-rim looked at it, then at the translucent man with no frost on his face at minus 54 degrees. Then he lowered his rifle. He asked what he would get. Young-ho said warmth, food, and work for the finger that wouldn't obey. Tae-rim smirked. It was the first smirk Young-ho had seen since his death that wasn't mean or cruel, just tired. Tae-rim grabbed his arm, a pain in his temple, moderate, bearable. Resident 9. The border accepted the sniper without a squeak, as if it had been waiting for exactly this type. Cold, precise, no questions asked. Taram found himself in the border, and the first thing he did was check his rifle, the bolt, the magazine, the scope. Then he looked at Young-ho and asked who needed to be killed. Young-ho replied that no one yet. Taram said he would wait. He sat down on the floor. He rested the rifle on his knees. He closed his eyes. He fell asleep in 12 seconds. Jung Saran approached Young-ho and whispered that this man was dangerous. Young-ho replied that that was exactly why he was there. On the 19th day, Young-ho did something he hadn't planned. He was walking through the Northern District in stealth mode when he spotted a heat signature in the entrance of an apartment building. Small, not human, an animal. He approached. In the corner of the entrance, between a broken radiator and the wall, lay a dog. A corgi, red with white, barely breathing, paws tucked in, nose dry and icy. Young-ho stopped. He looked at the dog. The dog opened one eye, looked at him. Its tail twitched once. Young-ho reached out, touched the dog's shadow. The corgi vanished from the stairwell and appeared in the border. The pain in his temple was so faint he barely noticed it, like a needle prick. Dogs are cheaper, less soul, less weight for the border. The corgi lay on the warm floor and breathed. Then he stood up. He trotted over to Si-hyun. He nudged his nose against Si-hyun's palm. Si-hyun froze. Then he dropped to his knees and hugged the dog. And he cried. For the first time in 3 weeks. Taram opened one eye. He looked at the corgi. He closed his eye. He said the dog needed a name. Through his tears, Si-hyun said, Little Bo. Taram said it was a silly name. Si-hyun said it was perfect. Baby Bo licked Si-hyun's face and flopped onto his side, exposing his belly. Jung Sarong jotted it down in her notebook. Resident 10. Canis familiaris, Pembroke Welsh Corgi. Estimated age 3 years. Condition, moderate malnutrition. Recommendation, double the usual ration. Prognosis, favorable. Young-ho stood to the side, watching the boy hugging the dog and the sniper who was pretending to sleep, though the left corner of his mouth was slightly raised. And the doctor who was recording the corgi's data with the same seriousness with which she recorded people's data. 10 residents, 9 people and 1 dog. A small world in the warmth. Young-ho turned toward the south wall. He looked outside. Somewhere out there in the icy hell at -50, Dojin sat on his throne in the B-17 bunker and counted people by the head. Young-ho counted too, but differently, not by the head, by name, by skill, by value, and by debt. Day 23, Uya 19, cycle mass 28 tons, radius 12 kilometers. The list is growing, the boundary is growing, the count is growing, and Dojin doesn't even know he's dead yet. On the 27th day, Young-ho absorbed the arsenal of the abandoned 7th Infantry Division base 40 kilometers southeast of Incheon. UY-22, cycle mass, 80 tons, thermal echo radius of 5 kilometers. He had sensed the base 2 days before he decided to take it. A huge dead spot on the thermal map, not a single living soul inside. The soldiers had left, or frozen to death, or been taken by the clans. The walls remained, the warehouses remained, the arsenal remained. Young-ho went out at night, alone, without Si-hyun, without Taram. He stood in semi-transparent mode in front of the base gates and counted. The main arsenal, 3 underground levels, small arms weapons, 5.45 and 7.62 caliber ammunition, grenades, anti-tank missiles, and on the lower level, a tank, 1, K1A2, 55 tons. Young-ho placed his palm on the gate. He touched the shadow. The gate vanished. Behind them, a corridor. He touched the shadow of the rack with the assault rifles. The rack vanished. 80 tons per cycle. The rack weighed 1.5 tons with its contents. 78.5 remained. The next rack, another one, another. He worked like a machine, without emotion.
No pauses. Touch. Disappearance. Touch. Disappearance. Ammo depot. 4 tons. Taken. Grenade depot. 2 tons. Taken. Anti-tank missiles. 6 tons. Taken. Then he went down to the lower level. A tank. K1A2. 55 tons. 1 cycle. Young-ho touched the tank's shadow. His fingers rested on the cold infrared outline. He pulled. Resistance. Heavy. As if the border were chewing on something too big, but it swallowed it. The tank vanished from the hangar and appeared in the eastern sector of the border. 55 tons of steel and firepower stood on the warm floor, gleaming in the soft light. Taram saw the tank. He stood up. He walked over. He walked around it. He touched the armor. Then he looked at Young-ho and, for the first time in 10 days, said more than one sentence. He said it was a K1A2 with reactive armor and a stabilized gun, and that if there were shells in this thing, they now had an argument against any bunker on the peninsula. Young-ho replied that the shells were in the shelf next door. 24 of them. Taram nodded. He sat down on the tank's armor. He closed his eyes. And Young-ho saw the sniper smile. For real. On the 28th day, guests arrived. Young-ho sensed them from 12 kilometers away. 6 heat signatures. Moving fast. Snowmobiles. 3 vehicles. 2 people each. Route. From the southwest to the former 7th Division base. They were heading for the empty arsenal. Young-ho sent out Si-hyun. The boy lay down on the roof of the nearest building, wrapped in a thermal blanket, and pressed his ear against the concrete. He listened. An hour later, he reported. 6 of them, armed, speaking Korean with a southern accent, mentioning white ash. One of them said the word elder, the White Ash Clan, reconnaissance. They came for weapons and found empty walls. Young-ho watched through the border's thermal scope. The 6 entered the base. They walked through the empty corridors. One of them crouched down where the tank had stood and touched the floor. There were traces, oil stains, scratches from tracks. But the tank was gone. The group commander took off his radio and began transmitting. Young-ho heard not the sound, but the vibration. But Si-hyun heard the words. The facility has been cleared. The armory is empty. Signs of removal. Method unknown. The gates have been dismantled. No vehicles detected. Removal impossible by standard means. I recommend classifying this as an anomaly. Silence on the other end. Then a voice, an old one, calm. The voice asked what kind of anomaly. The commander replied that he didn't know. The old voice told them to return and bring back everything they found, any evidence. The 6 began a search, methodical, professional. 2 hours later, they found it. A fingerprint, a palm print on a dusty surface at the entrance to the lower hangar. Young-ho touched the gate with his hand and left a mark. A mistake. The first mistake. The commander photographed the print. He packed a sample of the dust into a plastic container. 6 of them got on snowmobiles and left. 5 left. The 6th lingered. He stood by the gate and stared into space, right at the spot where Young-ho had been standing in semi-transparent mode. He didn't see him. He couldn't see him, but he was looking. Then he turned around and left. Young-ho remembered his heat signature. The 6th one was different. The other 5 moved like soldiers. The 6th moved like a scientist, carefully, precisely, with curiosity, not wariness. Young-ho returned to the border. He sat down. He closed his eyes. A palm print. A stupid mistake. He'd forgotten that he had a physical body that leaves traces. In the border, he is incorporeal. In the world, he is a ghost.
but a ghost with a sweaty palm. Jung Saran approached and asked what had happened. Young-ho told her. She was silent. Then she said that a palm print isn't just a trace, it's DNA. If the clan has a lab, and White Ash does, then in a week they'll know who he is. In 2 weeks, they'll know where he served. In 3 weeks, they'll come to Bunker B-17 and start asking Dojin questions. And Dojin will answer. Dojin will sell him out without a second thought. Young-ho nodded. He knew. The clock was ticking. A race he hadn't expected. He'd planned to grow quietly, level up, recruit residents, reach level 30 and, in one fell swoop, take over Bunker B-17 with all its contents. Now he had 3 weeks at most. Maybe 2. Maybe less. Taram sat on the tank's armor and cleaned his rifle. Without looking up, he asked if they should have killed those 6. Young-ho replied that they shouldn't have. Taram asked why. Young-ho said that a dead scout is an alarm. A missing scout is an alarm squared. A living scout with an empty report is confusion. Confusion buys time. Taram nodded. He said that was smart. Then he added that next time he should wear gloves. Young-ho didn't answer. He was staring at the number in the air. UYA 22. 80 tons. Not enough. Still not enough. But in 3 weeks, it will be enough. Or it won't. And then the list will remain unfinished. And he promised, by name, one by one. The promises of the dead have no statute of limitations. Day 30. UYA 25. Mass of the cycle, 200 tons. Radius of the thermal echo, 80 kilometers. Young-ho stood in the center of the border and saw the entire Korean peninsula for the first time. Not in its entirety, not in detail, but the outline, the thermal map. Orange dots of bunkers and enclaves on the blue, icy plain. There were fewer than he had expected, far fewer. Humanity was dying faster than he had thought. 30 days after the outbreak, the temperature at the equator had dropped to -58. On the peninsula, it was -62. The ocean was freezing, layer by layer. The ice already stretched 30 kilometers from the coast of Incheon, and things were rising from that ice. Si-hyun heard them first. On the 29th day, he woke up in the middle of the night and screamed. Young-ho ran over. The boy was sitting on the floor, covering his ears with his hands. He said he could hear it, outside, under the ice, a grinding sound, like nails on glass but lower. Infrasound. Something was moving under the ice. Young-ho went out to the south wall. He looked. The thermal imager showed something. 3 kilometers from the shore, beneath a 4-meter layer of ice, a thermal spot was moving. Not hot. On the contrary, it was 12 degrees colder than the surrounding ice. -74. A spot that radiated cold, not heat. Anti-heat. It was moving toward the shore, slowly, purposefully, and it wasn't alone. Young-ho counted 17 such spots within an 80-kilometer radius, 17 black holes of cold creeping toward the coast from the depths of the frozen ocean. Cold-born. He knew that word. He'd heard it on the 3rd day when the looters at the gas station were whispering about creatures made of ice, but he hadn't seen a single one. Now he saw one. The thermal imager showed a silhouette, 4 limbs, a torso, a head. It looked human, but the size, 3 meters at the withers, and a core temperature of -74. They fed on heat, sucked it out of everything alive. They approached the bunker, and the walls frosted over 3 times faster. The generators were running themselves into the ground. The people inside didn't understand why it had gotten colder, and outside stood the creature, drinking heat through the concrete. Young-ho returned to the border. He gathered everyone, 10 residents, 9 people, and little Bo. He told them. Taram asked if they could be killed. Young-ho replied that he didn't know. Jung Saran asked if they could be absorbed. Young-ho thought for a moment. They radiate cold. The border is warmth. Letting a source of anti-heat into the border is like setting fire to an oxygen tank. No, we can't absorb them, so we'll have to deal with them from the outside, physically. Taram said they now have a tank. Young-ho said the tank is inside the boundary, not outside. To get the tank out, we need to find an exit point, a flat one, large enough for 55 tons, and far enough from residential areas so as not to attract attention. That can wait. Right now, something else. Young-ho sat down.
He closed his eyes. He reached out toward Incheon, an 80-kilometer radius. He was searching, not the unborn, people, specialists. He needed a power engineer for the generator at the border. He needed an armorer for ammunition. He needed someone who understood fortifications. He understood it himself. He was a sergeant in the engineering corps, but he needed helping hands. After 2 days of external time, he found them. 3 of them. At different points on the peninsula, he took one at a time. The pain in his temple grew weaker with each attempt. The border was getting used to it. Or perhaps he was getting used to it. The number of residents rose to 13. On the 30th day, what he had been waiting for happened. Sun Hui-yun arrived in Incheon, in person. Young-ho picked up her satellite thermal imager 20 kilometers away. A foreign device was scanning the area, and its signature was different. Not passive, active. It was searching. Hui-yun was sitting in an armored off-road belonging to the Blue Salt Clan at an intersection 4 kilometers from the former Lomart. 2 operatives outside. She was inside. A screen in front of her. Data. Heat maps from the past 2 weeks. Satellite images. Survivors reports. She overlaid all the data and identified a pattern. A of origin. All the disappearances occurred within a 3 to 4 kilometer radius of a single point in a residential neighborhood in Incheon. She circled that point in red on her tablet. Then she looked up. She looked out the window, in the direction of that very neighborhood, and she said aloud, "You're there, whoever you are. You aren't moving. You are the anchor." Young-ho stood in the boundary and looked at her thermal signature through the wall. She was right. She had found his center, not him personally. She didn't know who he was or what he was, but she had found the point where the world loses objects. And she was right. He was an anchor, and he couldn't move. His physical body lay where he had died, at the door of Bunker B-17, frozen, dead, untouched. That was his anchor, his point of attachment to the physical world. He could reach 80 kilometers, but the center always remained there. If someone destroyed his body, the border would lose its anchor. He would lose everything. It was his second vulnerability after overpopulation. A dead body at the bunker door. Young-ho looked at the number in the air. UYA-25. He'd still be able to take his own body into the boundary. The body was part of the anchor, and the anchor could not be absorbed. But he could hide it. He went out at night. He touched the shadow of the concrete slab lying next to the bunker door. The slab vanished. Beneath it was a half-meter deep pit. He touched the shadow of the frozen earth around his body. The earth vanished layer by layer. The body sank into the hollow. Then he tossed the slab back, on top. An improvised grave, his own, for his own dead body, which he couldn't take with him and couldn't leave behind. Young-ho stood over the slab and thought that this was the strangest thing he had ever done in his life, or afterlife. Little Bo was waiting at the border and wagging his tail when he returned. The dog didn't know that its owner had just buried himself. Day 35. Dojin sold him out. Young-ho found out from Shi-hyun, who was sitting on the roof of a building 100 meters from Bunker B-17, listening. The White Ash Clan's reconnaissance team arrived at the bunker on 2 armored snowmobiles. 4 men in white thermal suits with the symbol of ash on their vests. They went inside and stayed for 2 hours. Si-hyun couldn't hear the conversation through the bunker walls, but he heard what happened afterward.
Dojin came out to see them off personally. He was smiling. His voice was smooth, satisfied. He told one of the men in white that the information about former Sergeant Choi Young-ho had been confirmed, that the fingerprint matched, that Young-ho had been in his unit, that he had died at the bunker door 35 days ago in minus 61-degree weather, and that the body must be lying outside. The man in white asked where exactly. Dojin pointed, right here, by this door. The four of them approached the door. They looked down. A concrete slab, snow, nothing. The body had vanished. Dojin turned pale. He said the body had been there, that he'd personally seen it through the camera on the second day. White replied that there was no body, that either Dojin was lying or the corpse had been taken away, or a third option, the dead man had walked away on his own. Dojin laughed. Nervously, he said that dead people don't walk. White didn't laugh. He took out his tablet. He showed Dojin a photo of a palm print from the 7th Division base's armory. Then he showed a second file, a DNA analysis, a match with the South Korean Army database. Sergeant Choi Young-ho, Engineer Corps, listed as deceased. And this deceased man, in 27 days, had emptied an arsenal weighing several hundred tons without a single vehicle. Dojin stopped laughing. White asked if he wanted to make some money. Dojin asked how much. White said 300 liters of diesel and an exosuit with a thermonuclear core. Dojin asked what he had to do. White answered with one word: bait. An hour after the scouts left, Dojin returned to the central room of the bunker. He approached Yuna. She was sitting on the floor, a chain, a collar, a meter and a half of freedom. Dojin crouched down beside her and told her that Young-ho was alive, that he was somewhere nearby, that he had returned. Yuna raised her head. Her eyes widened. Dojin said that if Young-ho had returned, he would come for her, because that's the kind of person Young-ho is. Stupid and loyal as a dog. He always comes back. Yuna was silent. Dojin said she would have to go outside, to the square in front of the bunker, alone, without the chain, like bait. When Young-ho approached, the White Ash people would take him. Yuna asked what would happen if she refused. Dojin replied that her parents would lose their places in the bunker, both of them, at the same time. It was minus 62 degrees outside. 2 old people. Estimated time of death, approximately 20 minutes. Yuna lowered her head. She was silent for 30 seconds. Then she nodded. Shihyun returned to the border and reported everything, word for word. The boy's hands were shaking, not from the cold, from anger. He asked if he could take Dojin right now, right from here, reach out to his shadow and pull him out. Young-ho replied that it was possible. Technically, UYA-25 is enough. But Dojin is inside the bunker. There are 60 people inside the bunker. If he pulls Dojin out, the others will see. Panic. Chaos. Someone will rush to the generator. Someone to the exit. People will die. And among those people are Yuna's parents and the 3-year-old daughter of a coworker to whom he promised cinnamon. No, not now, not piece by piece, all at once, in one motion. Take the entire bunker, all the people into the border, Dojin out, clean. Beautiful. By the book. For this, you need at least level 30. Better yet, 35. Even better, 40. To have a margin so that not a single innocent person is left outside. Taram listened from behind the tank's armor. He didn't clean his rifle. For the first time, he just listened. Then he asked how long until the ambush. Young-ho replied that Dojin would bring Yoon out in 2 or 3 days. White Ash would position his men, snipers on the rooftops, heat traps on the approaches, maybe electromagnetic traps. They don't know what it is, but they know it's related to heat and the disappearance of objects. They'll be targeting heat. Taram nodded. He said he knew how White Ash's ambushes worked. He'd been a shooter for Blackstone for 7 years. The Blackstone clan and the White Ash clan had clashed 3 times over control of the thermal stations. White Ash's tactics: a perimeter, 3 rings, the inner ring for capture, the middle ring for suppression, the outer ring for surveillance. In each ring, 4 to 6 operatives, a total of 12 to 18 fighters. The commander in the middle ring, communication on 142.7 megahertz. Young-ho listened and memorized it. Then he asked one thing. Was there anything White Ash had that he should fear? Taram thought. He said yes. Exo armor with a thermonuclear reactor. This isn't a regular bulletproof vest. It's an exoskeleton with a thorium cycle reactor. Output power, 12 megajoules. Built-in plasma torch. Ejection temperature, 2,000 degrees. In a world where everything is frozen, a person in exo armor is a little sun. He can burn through a bunker wall in 4 seconds. And White Ash promised Dojin such armor. So soon Dojin will have a weapon capable of cutting through concrete and steel. Young-ho nodded. That means there's even less time. Jung Saran stood in the corner of the infirmary and listened. Her belly had already rounded noticeably. She was in her 7th month, not yet 8, but close. She said that if Young-ho went on the ambush and lost, the border would disappear. 13 residents would disappear, including her, including the baby. Young-ho looked at her. She wasn't asking him not to go. She was stating a fact. Young-ho replied that he wouldn't go, not yet. But he needed something from that ambush. Information. How many of them there are, where they're positioned, what they're armed with. He wouldn't walk into a trap. He would walk past the trap and pick something up along the way so they would know, so they would see the number and drop their tablets. On the night of the 36th day, Yuna stepped out onto the plaza in front of Bunker B-17, without a collar, in a thin jacket, at minus 62 degrees. She stood there, shivering, and stared into the darkness. Behind her, on the roofs of 3 buildings, White Ash snipers lay in wait. In the alleys, fighters stood with thermal traps. The commander of the middle ring watched through a thermal scope. Young-ho watched from the border. He saw everything, everyone, every heat signature, every assault rifle, every sight. He saw Yuna, a small orange figure against a blue background, shivering, freezing, waiting for him. He looked at her and felt nothing. No, not like that. He felt something, but not what he expected. Not pity, not love, not longing. He felt arithmetic. She was standing in the square because Dojin had ordered it. Dojin had ordered it because White Ash had paid. White Ash had paid because he wanted him. A chain. Links. Yuna was one of the links. Not the first and not the last. Young-ho reached out. Not toward Yuna. Toward the snowmobile of the commander of the middle ring. The vehicle was parked in an alley 200 meters from the square. 1.5 tons. A trifle. He touched the shadow. The snowmobile vanished. A dent remained in the snow in the alley. The commander turned around. Empty. The vehicle was there, and then it wasn't. Young-ho touched the shadow of his radio. The radio vanished from his pocket. The commander grabbed at his empty pocket, then at his holster. Young-ho touched the shadow of the holster. The pistol vanished. The commander stood in the alley without a vehicle, without communication, without a weapon, and shook his head. Young-ho hadn't touched him. He didn't touch the snipers. He didn't touch Yuna. He only took the things. The snowmobile, the radio, the gun. Small change. A message. I'm here. I can see you. You can't see me. And I take what I want when I want. Ouya 25. That's not 30, but it's enough for you. Yuna stood in the square for 40 minutes. Then Dojin let her back out. The ambush failed. Dojin didn't understand how. White Ash understood. Day 40. UYA 31. Cycle mass, 500 tons. Thermal echo radius, 160 kilometers. Young-ho stood by the southern wall of the border and looked at the mansion, the former residence of the Minister of Defense in the suburbs of Seoul. A 3-story house with a 4-level underground bunker, its own liquid nitrogen generator, a year's worth of supplies. Inside were 8 bodyguards and the minister himself, the former minister, now just an old man with resources. Young-ho hadn't come for the old man, he came for the bunker. 4 underground levels, walls 1.5 meters thick, steel doors, ventilation systems, medical equipment, a generator, supplies. All of this was worth more than any supermarket or any arsenal. It was infrastructure, real, military grade. Young-ho stepped out in semi-transparent mode. Night, minus 63 degrees, silence. No snow was falling because there was no moisture left in the air, only ice and silence. He approached the mansion's fence. He touched the shadow. The fence vanished. 20 meters of wrought iron dissolved into nothingness. The guard on the porch saw the fence disappear. He raised his rifle. He shouted, "Alarm!" Young-ho didn't stop. He touched the shadow of the front door. The door vanished. He touched the shadow of the first-floor wall. Part of the wall vanished. A hallway opened up. Bodyguards ran out of the rooms. 4 with automatic rifles, 2 with shotguns, 1 with a pistol. Young-ho walked down the hallway and disarmed them by touching their shadows. The automatic rifle vanished from the first man's hands. The shotgun from the second man's hands. The third managed to fire. The bullet passed through Young-ho's translucent body and struck the wall behind him. He isn't solid in this mode. He is a shadow. Bullets don't work. The third dropped the shotgun himself. He retreated, fell, crawled. Young-ho walked past them, didn't touch them, didn't hit them, didn't speak. Just kept walking down to the underground levels. On the first underground level stood a generator. Young-ho touched its shadow. The generator vanished. The lights went out. Darkness. Screams from above. Young-ho could see in the dark. The thermal imager was part of him. He could see every degree, every body, every wall. On the second underground level were the supplies. Food, water, medicine. Young-ho touched the shadows and took them, layer by layer, cycle by cycle. 500 tons per cycle. Enough to take the entire contents of the bunker in 2 passes. On the third level was the armory. He took it all. On the fourth level, the medical unit, the operating room, the CT scanner, the ventilator, surgical instruments that would have made Jung Saran cry with joy. He took them. Then he went upstairs. The bodyguards sat on the floor in the darkness and silence, without weapons, without light, no generator, no supplies. They heard things disappearing with a quiet sound from the floors below. Inhale, 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 as if the house were breathing and growing emptier with every breath. Young-ho found the minister on the second floor in the bedroom. The 72-year-old man sat in a chair in complete darkness, holding a glass in his hand. Empty. When Young-ho entered, the old man didn't move. He said he'd been waiting, not specifically for him, waiting for the end, in any form. Young-ho asked if he wanted to live. The old man replied that he didn't particularly. But if the alternative was to freeze to death in an empty house without a generator, then perhaps yes. Young-ho held out his hand. The old man looked at it, then at the translucent figure in a black coat with an aura of warmth. He asked what he was. Young-ho said he was a debtor. The old man didn't understand, but took his hand. Resident 14. A faint ache in his temple, familiar, like the sound of rain. The former Minister of Defense of the Republic of Korea stood in the border and looked at the K-1A2 tank and the racks of weapons and the medical station and the teenager holding a corgi and the sniper on the armor and the pregnant surgeon with a notebook. Then he sat down on the floor. Then he lay down. Then he fell asleep. He was 72 years old and hadn't slept for 14 days. Jung Saran saw the CT scanner. She walked over. She touched it. She turned to Young-ho. Her eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. She just nodded. Young-ho nodded back. The next night, those he had been waiting for arrived. 6 of them. The White Ash Clan's reconnaissance unit. A different group. Not the one that had been at the 7th Division base. These were better, faster. 3 snowmobiles, latest generation thermal suits, each with a thermal spectrum scanner on their wrist. They pulled up to the mansion and saw an empty house. No fence. No front door. Part of the first floor wall was missing. Inside, it was empty. Completely. No furniture, no walls between the rooms, no generator, no supplies, just a concrete shell. The bodyguards had left on foot, except for one, the one who had fired the shot. He was sitting in a corner, rocking back and forth. When the scouts approached, he grabbed one by the sleeve and started talking, fast, stammering. He talked about a shadow, about a man from the warmth, about how things vanish at his touch, about how bullets pass right through him, about how he isn't a man but a hole in the shape of a man. The scout wrote it all down, sent it over the radio. On the other end sat a man whose voice Shi-hyun had heard twice before. Old, calm. The voice said one word, level. The group commander activated the scanner, aimed it at the empty space where the generator had stood. The device showed a residual heat signature, anomalous, plus 21 degrees Celsius at the point of contact, with an outside temperature of minus 63, a difference of 84 degrees. The device attempted to calculate the energy required to maintain such a temperature difference. The number didn't fit on the screen. The commander read the data over the radio. The old voice fell silent. Then he asked for a repeat. The commander repeated it. The voice said it was impossible. The commander replied that he was looking at the device's readings. The voice fell silent for 10 seconds. Then it spoke a single sentence. The Elder is coming out personally. 5 of the 6 scouts got on snowmobiles and left. The 6th lingered, the same one as last time, the one who moved like a scientist. He stood in the middle of the empty bunker and ran the scanner along the walls, slowly, centimeter by centimeter. Then he stopped. The scanner beeped. He had found a second print. Not a palm print, a footprint. Young-ho had walked barefoot on the 4th level. He didn't remember when he'd taken off his boots. Maybe inside the boundary, maybe on the way out. A second mistake. The scientist carefully collected the sample, placed it in a container. Then he raised his head and looked into the void again, to the place where, behind the thin veil between worlds, Young-ho stood and looked back at him. The scientist smiled, barely noticeably, as if he knew. Young-ho clenched his fists. 2 traces from 2 operations, carelessness, or inevitability. The body he had considered a tool turned out to be an anchor with traces. Every exit into the physical world is a trace. Every trace is a thread. Every thread leads to him. And that scientist was gathering the threads, patiently, carefully, with a smile. In the border, Young-ho sat down on the floor. He looked at the number, UYA31, 500 tons, 160 kilometers, 14 residents, a tank, an arsenal, a medical station with a CT scanner, A bunker with a year's worth of supplies. A lot. He had gathered a lot. But someone had gathered it, thread by thread. And somewhere far to the south, in the White Ash Clan enclave, an old man in a chair was reading the report and crying. For the first time in 50 years, not out of fear, Elder Yoon Gyung-chul was crying because he had lived to see this day. 20 years of searching, 20 years of waiting, the gatekeeper had been found. And he was even stronger than the calculations had predicted. Gyung-chul wiped his eyes. He placed the report on the table. He looked at the hexagonal mark on his forehead. It glowed dimly in the mirror across from him,
just like the one on Young-ho's shoulder blade, but older, stronger. Kyung-chul smiled, gently, like a father smiling at a photograph of a child he hadn't seen in 28 years. Then he stood up and began to get ready. On the 42nd day, Young-ho saw the Coldborn up close for the first time. The creature emerged from a crack in the ice 6 kilometers off the coast of Incheon and moved toward a residential district where 3 basement shelters were still smoldering. UYA-33, mass of the cycle, 700 tons, radius, 200 kilometers. Young-ho stood in semi-transparent mode on the roof of a 5-story building and looked down. The creature was larger than he had imagined from the thermal imager. 3 meters 20 at the withers, 4 limbs, a humanoid silhouette but with inhuman proportions, arms reaching to the ground, a small head, no eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, icy surface with cracks from which steam seeped. Not hot, cold. Body temperature minus 76. It moved slowly, step by step. Each step left a white mark on the asphalt. Not frost, deeper. The asphalt beneath her feet froze half a meter deep and cracked. She was heading toward the nearest basement. 23 people inside. A pedal-powered generator. The temperature inside was +4. The creature stopped 10 meters from the basement entrance. It stood up, froze, and began to drink. Young-ho saw this through the thermal imager. The orange spot of the basement began to fade, as if someone were smoothly turning down the brightness. +4, +3, +2. The creature stood motionless, drawing heat through the concrete, through the ground, through the walls. The people inside began to freeze. He heard through the vibrations someone shout that the generator couldn't keep up. Someone screamed to pedal faster. Young-ho climbed down from the roof. He stood between the creature and the basement. 10 meters. His aura was +21. Its aura was minus 76. The difference between them was 97 degrees. The air between them exploded, not with fire, with condensation. Microcrystals of ice flared up and hung in the air like fog. The creature turned its head. A smooth, eyeless surface turned toward him. It sensed him. Heat. A lot of heat. More than in the basement. More than 23 people. Infinite +21. It stepped toward him. Young-ho didn't back down. He reached out. He tried to touch the shadow. The creature had no infrared shadow. It didn't emit heat. It absorbed it. It had an anti-shadow, a black hole in the thermal spectrum. Young-ho's fingers passed through the void. Nothing. A shadow touch doesn't work. No shadow, no contact. The creature took another step, 2 meters. Young-ho felt the cold, real cold. For the first time since his death, the boundary had protected him from any temperature. But this wasn't the cold of the air. It was the cold of absence. The creature was drawing heat from him, from the boundary, from the very layer between worlds. A number flashed in the air. Ouya, 33. Then 32. Then 33 again. His level was fluctuating. The creature was drinking his power. Young-ho retreated, quickly, 5 steps back. The aura stabilized. Ouya, 33. The creature wasn't pursuing him. It turned back toward the basement, slowly, indifferently. Young-ho stood and thought. Shadow touch isn't working. Direct contact is dangerous. It's draining his power.
Within 2 meters, he loses his strength. But bullets. Terim, the tank. Physical weapons in the physical world. Young-ho returned to the border. He approached Terim. The sniper was sitting on the tank's armor, taking apart his rifle. Young-ho said he had a job for him. An hour later, Terim was lying on the roof of a 5-story building with a 7.62 and was looking through the scope at the cold-born. Young-ho had sent him out of the border fully equipped. A thermal suit from the mansion's supplies, 3 layers of insulation, a mask, gloves, an oxygen tank for 2 hours. Terim took aim. The creature's head. 300 meters. Wind speed 8 meters per second. Adjustment. Fire. The bullet struck the creature in the head. The icy surface cracked. A shard flew off. The creature didn't move. Didn't turn. Didn't react. The crack in its head closed in 3 seconds. Terim fired again. In the chest. Same result. A crack. 3 seconds. Regeneration. Terim shot it in the leg. In the knee, where the limb meets the torso. A wider crack. 5 seconds for regeneration. But regeneration. Terim lowered his rifle. He reported over the radio that Young-ho had assembled from captured parts. The rifle isn't working. The 7.62 caliber leaves only superficial damage. Regeneration takes 3 to 5 seconds. Recommendation: heavy equipment is needed. Or fire. Young-ho heard the word fire and fell into thought. Plus 21, his aura. 2,000 degrees, the plasma torch of the exo armor that White Ash had promised to Dojin. Maybe fire is the answer, but he didn't have exo armor. He had a tank, a high explosive fragmentation shell, an explosion temperature of about 3,000 degrees at the point of detonation. Young-ho returned to the border. He walked up to the tank. He looked at the gun. Then at Terim, who was already coming back down the stairs. Terim caught his gaze, nodded, said he knew how to drive. Not a tank specifically, but he'd driven an armored personnel carrier. He'd figure it out. Young-ho found an exit point, a wide open space where a parking lot used to be, 300 meters from the basement. Smooth asphalt, plenty of room. He rolled the tank out. 55 tons of steel appeared in the parking lot with a rumble that could be heard 2 kilometers away. Terim climbed into the hatch. The engine started on the 3rd try. The diesel hadn't frozen because the tank had been parked in the border zone at 21 degrees above zero. Terim maneuvered the vehicle into position. He aimed the gun. The creature was standing by the basement. 400 meters, direct fire. Terim reported he was ready. Young-ho stood on the roof in semi-transparent mode and watched. He said one word. Fire! The tank fired. A high explosive fragmentation shell struck the creature in the chest. An explosion. 3,000 degrees. The shockwave scattered ice and debris 30 meters away. When the smoke cleared, the creature lay on the ground, broken into 4 pieces. Head separate, arms separate, torso separate. The pieces didn't move. They didn't regenerate. Instead of regenerating, steam rose from the debris. Hot steam. The creature was melting. The ice it was made of turned into water at above freezing temperatures from the explosion, and the water immediately froze again, but now without form, without structure, without life. A minute later, a puddle of murky ice remained on the asphalt. Terim reported, "Target destroyed. 1 shell expended. 23 remaining." Si-hyun stood inside the boundary and listened. When he heard the word destroyed, he whispered aloud, "It works." The people in the basement heard the explosion. They didn't see what happened, but the temperature inside stopped dropping. The generator was holding up again. Someone inside was crying with relief, not understanding why it had gotten warmer. Young-ho took the tank back into the boundary. Terim climbed out and sat on the armor. He said that if there were 17 creatures and 23 shells, the math added up. Young-ho replied that there had been 17 creatures 10 days ago. Now there might be more. Taram shrugged. He said he'd find more shells, or Young-ho would. Little Bo ran up to Taram and nudged his boot with his nose. Taram bent down and scratched the dog behind the ear, without looking, mechanically, as if he'd been doing it his whole life. On the 45th day, Si-hyun returned from reconnaissance as white as a sheet. He'd been lying on the roof of the building near the B-17 bunker for 4 hours, listening, and what he heard made him run back to the border without waiting for the appointed time. Dojin had received his exo-armor. Young-ho sat in the infirmary while Jung Saran conducted her weekly examination. She scanned the hexagon on his shoulder blade with a tomograph and recorded the data. The mark was growing. On the first day, it was 3 centimeters in diameter. Now it was 7. The glow had tripled in intensity. Jung Saran said that the mark wasn't just a label, but an interface between his body and the border. That it grew in proportion to the anchor level. That at anchor level 47, it could cover his entire shoulder blade. She didn't know what that meant, but she recorded it. Si-hyun burst in. He was gasping for breath. He spoke incoherently. Young-ho stood up. He told him to speak slowly. Si-hyun exhaled. He began. Dojin received the exo-armor 2 hours ago. It was brought in by an armored convoy. 3 vehicles, 12 white ash fighters. They remained in the bunker, the garrison. Now B-17 is not just Dojin's bunker, but a White Ash Clan outpost. Dojin put on the armor in the square in front of the crowd. 62 people watched. The exoskeleton was white with a gray stripe on the shoulder. A thermonuclear reactor on his back between his shoulder blades. 12 megajoules. A plasma torch on his right forearm. Dojin activated the torch and aimed it at the bunker wall. The meter-thick wall burned through in 6 seconds. Right through it. The crowd recoiled. Dojin turned to face them. He smiled. He said this was the new order, that now he didn't need generators or pedals. The thermonuclear reactor provided heat. The torch provided protection. He was the god of this bunker. Then he looked toward the square, toward the void, and he said loudly, "If you can hear me, Young-ho, then come. I'm waiting. I have 2 words for you, mathematics and physics." Then he laughed and went inside. Lim Jisoo stood next to him, the very same one, the one who laughed when Young-ho was dying. Jisoo was now Dojin's deputy, his right-hand man. He nodded and laughed and repeated every word after Dojin like an echo. Si-hyun finished. Silence. Jung Saran stood with a notebook in her hands. Tae-rim sat on the floor sharpening a knife. Little Bo lay at Si-hyun's feet. The 14 residents were going about their business, but everyone froze. Everyone heard. Young-ho stood motionless. Then he said one thing. UYA-33. The cycle's mass. 700 tons. That's enough to take the exo-armor off Dojin right now. It weighs 80 kilos. Peanuts! But the 12 white ash fighters are a problem. They're armed, trained. They're in contact with the clan headquarters. If he touches Dojin now, they'll send a signal, and in 24 hours the entire clan will descend on Incheon. And the elder is already on his way to him, in person. Tae-rim looked up. He asked how Young-ho knew about the elder. Young-ho replied that he could sense it, to the south, 150 kilometers away. A convoy of 5 vehicles is moving north, slowly. The roads are frozen, ice on the asphalt, speed 30 kilometers per hour. They'll be here in 5 days. And in the center of the convoy, a thermal signature he's never seen on anyone before. Bright. Unbelievably bright. A person with a core temperature of plus 42, with minus 63 outside, without thermal suits, no exo-armor, just a body at plus 42. That's not normal. That's not human physiology. Tae-rim turned pale. He said he'd heard things about the elder, rumors. A story circulated among the Blackstone mercenaries that Yoon Kyung-chol doesn't age, that he was 71 but looked 50, that he had survived 3 assassination attempts and each time the bullets stopped in midair before him, that he had a mark on his forehead, like a brand. It glowed when he was angry. Taram had considered it a fairy tale. Now he didn't. Young-ho listened and said nothing. The mark on his forehead. A hexagon, just like the one on his shoulder blade. 2. There are 2 of them. Jung Saran approached, quietly. She stood beside him. She said that if the elder had the same mark, then he was also connected to the border. What if the border wasn't Young-ho's personal anomaly, but a space for 2? Or more? Young-ho replied that he didn't know, but in 5 days he'll find out. Day 48, UY36, cycle mass, 1,500 tons. Young-ho worked nonstop. Internal time was running at 6-1, and he used every hour. He rebuilt the border. He expanded the living quarters to 40 places. He organized the warehouses by category. He handed the weapons arsenal over to Turam and the armorer. The medical station became a hospital. Jung Saran was in charge. Her belly was already big, 8th month. She worked standing at the operating table until her legs swelled, then sat down on a chair and worked while seated. Young-ho told her to rest. She replied that rest was a luxury for a surgeon without patients, and she had 14. He didn't argue. On the 50th day, Si-hyun reported something new. Yoona had seen Young-ho, not in real life, in a dream. Si-hyun had overheard her telling one of the women in the bunker. She said she had seen a man in a black coat. He was standing in a warm room with no walls. He was looking at her. He didn't speak. He just looked, and she didn't recognize him. She described him as a stranger, tall, thin, dark eyes, a calm face, like that of a man who had long since stopped rushing. She said she felt warm in her dream. For the first time in 50 days, she felt warm. Then she woke up and it was -8 in the bunker because the generator was acting up again. Young-ho listened. He was silent. Yoona didn't recognize him. He had changed. The border had changed him. When he looked at his reflection in the steel surface of the tomograph, he saw a face he remembered, but a different one, sharper, quieter. The eyes of not a 28-year-old sergeant, but of someone who had lived 300 internal days inside himself over the course of 50 external ones. Someone who measures people in grams and remembers the taste of cinnamon. Young-ho turned away. He looked at the south wall. The elder's column was already 80 kilometers away. 3 days. Maybe 2. He didn't know what Yoon Kyung-chol wanted. Didn't know why he was coming. Didn't know what the second gatekeeper meant. But he knew one thing. Before the elder got here, Dojin had to be shut down. The list had to be carried out, by name, one by one. Young-ho closed his eyes. When he opened them, a number flashed in the air. U-E-A 37. Day 53. U-E-A 39. Mass of the cycle, 3,000 tons. Radius, 300 kilometers. Young-ho pulled Si-hyun and 3 fighters from among the residents out of the Tarim border. Night. -64. They stood on the roof of a building 200 meters from bunker B-17 and looked down. The bunker had changed. Dojin had reinforced the perimeter. Concrete blocks around the entrance. 2 floodlights powered by a generator. Barbed wire. 2 guards at the door. 2 on the roof. All 4 in white thermal suits of the White Ash clan. Each had a temperature sensor on their wrist that beeped at any temperature difference of more than 3 degrees within a 20-meter radius. Young-ho couldn't get closer 20 meters without setting off the alarm. His aura plus 21 is an 85-degree difference. The siren would wail in half a second. Taram lay nearby, looking through his scope. He reported, 2 on the roof, open position, firing sector 360. weapons, assault rifles, and a grenade launcher. One has a backpack flamethrower on his back. A model Taram recognized. The White Ash Clan. Standard issue for an assault team. Flame temperature, 1,200 degrees. Not 2,000 like exo armor, but enough to roast anyone. Young-ho listened and counted. 12 White Ash fighters inside. 4 on guard duty. 8 in the barracks on the first underground level. Plus Dojin in exo armor. Plus Lim Jisoo. Plus 62 civilians. Among them, Yuna, her parents, the 3-year-old girl who had given him a cinnamon lollipop 100 internal days ago. The plan he had been hatching for 30 days was simple. One touch, take the entire bunker. Walls, ceilings, floors, generators, people, everything. Dump it into the border, sort it out, leave the civilians, throw out the fighters, send Dojin to a deep chamber. But the thermal sensors are a problem. 20 meters is too far for precise absorption of an entire building. He needs to be closer. 10 meters. 5. He has to touch the bunker's shadow, and the bunker's shadow starts at its walls. Guards with sensors are standing by the walls. Taram suggested a solution. Take out the guards. 4 shots, 4 targets, 4 seconds. Without the sensors, the alarm won't go off. Young-ho will approach the wall. Touch it, take it. Young-ho thought. He asked what would happen if they heard a sniper shot inside. Taram said nothing. The walls are a meter thick. A 7.62 caliber with a silencer is a click that a meter of concrete won't let through. Unless you shoot near the ventilation shaft. Young-ho nodded. Then he paused. Then he said, no. Taram raised an eyebrow. Young-ho explained. The 4 guards are White Ash people, soldiers. If the 4 go missing, the clan will find out in 6 hours when they don't check in. In 12 hours, they'll send a search party. In a day, they'll realize the bunker is empty. That's normal. It fits the plan. But the Elders' convoy is 50 kilometers away. It'll be here in 2 days. If the clan realizes the bunker has been taken 2 days before the Elder's arrival, the Elder will be prepared. And Young-ho wants the Elder to see it. In person. Live. In front of the drones broadcasting to all 7 enclaves. Publicly. Day 56. No, not now. Later, when everything falls into place. Taram asked when. Young-ho replied. Day 71. Taram counted. 18 days. He asked why specifically the 71st. Young-ho replied that on that day, Dojin plans a public execution in the square in front of the bunker. Broadcast to all enclaves, clan drones, cameras. The entire peninsula will be watching. Taram asked how he knew about the execution. Young-ho said that Shihyun had overheard Dojin discussing it with Gi-soo. They want to make an example of 3 civilians who tried to escape a week ago, publicly, on camera, to scare the others. Taram nodded. He said it was cruel. Young-ho said it was perfect. The entire peninsula would watch the execution and see something else. They returned to the border. Young-ho sat down by the southern wall. He closed his eyes. 18 days of external time. 108 of internal time. Enough. On the 58th day, Uya 41, Yuna saw him again. This time, not in a dream. Si-hyun was standing by the border wall, listening to the world, when he suddenly said that Yuna had gone out into the square, alone, without guards. Dojin let go of the chain. She stood in the wind at -64 degrees in a thin jacket, staring into the void. Young-ho approached the wall. He looked. She stood 20 meters from his anchor point, thin, pale, her hair cut short, her hands from the cold. She stood there and whispered. Si-hyun listened. She was whispering his name. Young-ho, Young-ho, Young-ho. She wasn't calling out. She wasn't screaming. She was whispering, like a prayer or like an apology. Young-ho stood behind the wall between worlds and listened. A distance of 20 meters and 1 layer of reality. He could reach out and take her, right now, touch the shadow, Pull her out. Take her away from Dojin. Forever. But that's not a plan. That's an emotion. Emotion is a mistake. He stepped away from the wall, returned to the shelves, sat down, looked at the number. UYA 41. 3,600 tons per cycle. In 13 days, it will be 71. By that day, he'll be at 45, maybe 47. Enough to take out a skyscraper.
Enough to take out a bunker with all its contents, with a single touch, with a single movement, in full view of the entire peninsula. Names don't fade. Debts aren't forgiven. Young-ho closed his eyes and began counting the days. Day 68, Ouya 46, cycle mass, 60,000 tons. Thermal echo radius, 3 kilometers, 800 meters. No, not kilometers, 380 kilometers. Young-ho could see the entire peninsula, every bunker, every enclave, every living person from Busan to Seoul. Orange dots on a blue map. There were fewer than 2 months ago, far fewer. The number of the chilled ones had grown, 43. They emerged from the ocean ice in waves, a new batch every week. Young-ho had destroyed 11 in the last month, with tank shells, 12 shells left, for 32 creatures. The math was bad, but that wasn't the point now. 3 days until the 71st. Young-ho stood in the center of the border and surveyed his world. The space stretched 50 kilometers, a city within a void, a residential quarter with 40 units, a hospital with an operating room and a maternity ward that Jong Saran had prepared in her 9th month, an arsenal, a food warehouse for 2 years, a tank, 2 armored personnel carriers that he had hauled out from various bases, a workshop where an electrical engineer was assembling a communication system from captured radios, a training ground where Taerim was drilling 5 fighters, and in the center of it all, a corgi that ran between the sectors and wagged its tail at everyone it met. T-14 residents, not many for a city, enough for a family. Young-ho approached Jong Saran. She was sitting at the table, writing in a notebook, the 20th notebook. All the previous ones lay in a stack on the shelf. The scientific journal, Boundaries. She looked up. She asked if he was ready. Young-ho said yes. She stood up. It was hard. 9 months pregnant, due in a week, maybe in 5 days. She walked over to him. She put her hand on his shoulder. She said that when he took over the bunker in its entirety, 62 people plus 12 soldiers plus Dojin, that would be 75 new residents in an instant. Right now, there were 14 residents. The safe limit for UYA 47 was about 300. There's a reserve. But 75 people at once isn't 6. It's a shock. She didn't know what kind. Maybe he'll lose consciousness. Maybe he'll lose an hour of memory. Maybe a day. Maybe he'll forget someone's name. And what if he forgets the wrong name? Young-ho nodded. He said he knew, that he was ready. Jong Saran looked him in the eyes. She said she didn't believe him, that no one is ready to give up a piece of themselves, but that she would stand by his side and check his pulse, which isn't there. She smiled. He didn't smile. Young-ho went to Taerim. The sniper was standing by the weapons rack, loading magazines. Young-ho explained the plan. Taerim listened. He didn't interrupt. Then he nodded. He said it was simple, beautifully simple, and he asked one thing: what to do with the 12 white ash fighters once they were inside the border. Young-ho answered, take their weapons, strip them, throw them back out into the square, at minus 64 degrees. Taerim raised an eyebrow. He said that was a death sentence. Young-ho said no. He'd throw them out in thermal suits without weapons. They'd survive. They wouldn't fight. Taerim nodded. Then he asked about Dojin. Young-ho didn't answer. He looked past Taerim into the emptiness of the border, to where, at the very edge of the warm and cold zones, 7 kilometers from the residential district, there was an empty, dark space. Young-ho had been preparing it for a month, a cell.
walls made of concrete blocks he'd hauled from a construction site, a ceiling of steel beams, a tiled floor, a room 4 by 4 meters, no windows, with a single lamp, with a single chair. The temperature was 21 degrees, just like everywhere else in the border. But here, on the edge of the comfort zone, time flowed a little differently, subjectively slower. Not 6 to 1, but something closer to 10. An hour outside, 10 hours inside, and nothing. Not a sound, no people, no little bow, just walls and a chair and a lamp and time. Taram looked at the camera, then at Young-ho, said it was worse than death. Young-ho replied that this was the point. Day 70, UY-47, cycle mass, 80,000 tons, radius 400 kilometers. The number stood firm. Young-ho felt that level 47 was a threshold, not a ceiling, but a wall that had to be broken through otherwise. Not with desire, not with rage, with something else. He didn't know what, but tomorrow it won't matter. 47 is enough. 80,000 tons! Bunker B-17 weighs about 12,000 tons, including its contents and the people inside. A 6-fold reserve, more than enough. That night, he walked around the perimeter. He spoke with every resident, not about tomorrow, about something else. He asked the engineer about the generator. He asked the cook if there was enough grain. He asked the armorer if the automatic rifles were ready for the new fighters. He approached Si-hyun. The boy wasn't asleep. He was sitting on the bed, stroking little Bo. Young-ho sat down next to him. He was silent for a moment. Then he said that tomorrow he would take many people away, and among them would be those who had betrayed him. Si-hyun nodded. Young-ho said that among them would be a woman, Yuna, that she would be frightened, that Si-hyun should take her to the residential sector and give her water. Not to say who he is, not to explain, just water and a blanket. Si-hyun nodded again. He asked, and then? Young-ho replied that she would see for herself later. Baby Bo yawned and rested his snout on Young-ho's knee, warm, soft. Young-ho placed his palm on the dog's head, scratched him behind the ear. Tomorrow is day 71. 71 days since he died at the steel door with a cinnamon lollipop on his tongue. He closed his eyes. The taste of cinnamon returned, phantom-like, impossible, but distinct. He promised, by name us, one by one. Tomorrow is the first turn, the first name, Park Do-jin. Day 71. The square in front of Bunker B-17, minus 64. Do-jin had transformed the square into an arena, a platform made of concrete blocks in the center. Each block had been hauled by the hands of workers who pedaled for 8 hours a shift to earn the right not to freeze. A throne made of welded steel sheets stood in the center of the platform. Rough, ugly, but tall. Do-jin loved heights. He loved looking down from above. Spotlights on 4 poles flooded the square with a deathly yellow light from diesel generators that guzzled fuel like starving dogs. 6 drones of the White Ash clan hovered over the square. Cameras pointed downward. Lenses coated with anti-icing compound. Red lights flashed in the icy air. A live broadcast to all 7 enclaves of the peninsula. Thousands of people are watching. In bunkers, in basements, in burrows dug into the frozen ground. On the screens of tablets and laptops with their last few % of battery life. They're watching because Do-jin ordered the broadcast. They were watching because White Ash wanted them to see. What happens to those who disobey? Do-jin stood on the platform in exo-armor, a white exoskeleton with a gray stripe on the right shoulder, the emblem of the White Ash clan. The thermonuclear reactor on his back pulsed blue. The thorium cycle. 12 megajoules of output power.
The reactor hummed with a low sound that was felt not with the ears but with the teeth. A plasma torch on his right forearm. An exhaust temperature of 2,000 degrees. In a world where everything was frozen, Dojin glowed with heat like a small, evil sun. Next to him, on her knees, was Yuna. A collar made of a steel strip 3 fingers wide. A chain as thick as her arm was chained to the throne's armrest. 1.5 meters of freedom. Enough to reach the edge of the platform and back. Her face was bowed. Her eyes were empty. Her hands were on her knees. Her palms were turned upward. She had stopped trembling. Not because she had warmed up, because she had stopped feeling. 71 days in a collar does things to a person that are worse than the cold. The cold kills the body. The collar kills what's inside. Behind the platform stands Lim Jisoo. He's smiling. He's always smiling. That wet, thin smile that looks like a crack in the plaster. Jisoo has put on weight in 2 months. The only person in the B-17 bunker who gained weight because he ate 3 times a day while the rest ate once. Because he was Dojin's right-hand man. Because he did what Dojin didn't want to do with his own beautiful hands. Next to Jisoo are 3 bound prisoners. The very same ones. The rebels who tried to escape 2 weeks ago. They dug a tunnel with spoons through the wall of the underground level. 8 days of work, 20 centimeters of concrete. They were caught on the 9th day when they were 4 centimeters from the outer wall. A 40-year-old man, an engineer, the hands that dug. A 30-year-old woman, a nurse. She fed them from her own rations. A 17-year-old teenager, the engineer's son. He held the spoons, their knees on the concrete, hands tied behind their backs with cable ties. Faces gray, eyes red. They hadn't slept for 3 days. Dojin kept them in a cold chamber on the lower level at -12 degrees. Not fatal, but enough for their toes to turn black and stop bending. A crowd of 62 residents of B-17 has been herded into the square. They stand in a semicircle, silent. Children pressed against their parents. The elderly stand with their eyes closed because they don't want to see. The young stand with theirs open because they can't look away. White ash fighters line the perimeter. 12 men, white thermal suits, assault rifles at the ready. A thermal sensor on each wrist, faces covered by masks, eyes behind visors. They are not people. They are a function. Walls of flesh surround Dojin's arena. Dojin raised his hand. The crowd froze. Even the wind froze, though the wind does not obey gestures. He began to speak. He spoke of order, about rules, about how the B-17 bunker is the last bastion of civilization on the northern part of the peninsula. That civilization demands discipline. That discipline demands sacrifices. That sacrifices demand an example. His voice was confident, loud, amplified by a speaker on the chest of his exo-armor. The words flowed like molasses, thick, sweet, sticky. He spoke beautifully. Dojin always spoke beautifully. A velvety voice, pauses in all the right places, an intonation that rises before a key word and falls afterward, like a preacher, like a politician, like a man who knows that words are weapons, or rather, flamethrowers. That is exactly why they believed him. That's exactly why they followed him. That's exactly why 62 people stood in the cold and listened instead of running away. That's exactly why Young-ho saved his life twice, 3 years ago, during training exercises. A fragmentation grenade ricocheted off the wall and rolled toward Dojin. Young-ho jumped, covered him with his body, a shard just above Dojin's eyebrow. Young-ho took 3 shards in the back, 2 months in the hospital, a 12-centimeter scar on his left side. Dojin came to the ward on the 2nd day, sat down next to him. He took his hand, said he wouldn't forget, that it was a debt, that he was a brother. Young-ho believed him, because he believed that behind the beautiful words stood a beautiful person.
because he wanted to believe. Dojin finished speaking. He turned toward the bound ones. He stepped toward them. The exo-armor hummed with servo motors. He activated the plasma torch. A blue flame shot half a meter from his forearm, a searing tongue of plasma. The air around the torch trembled and warped. 2,000 degrees at the focal point. The heat reached the front rows of the crowd, and people recoiled. A woman among the bound ones screamed, not with words, with a sound. A pure, animal sound that made the shoulders of the people in the crowd twitch. The teenager next to her clenched his teeth so hard that the muscles on his cheekbones bulged. The engineer closed his eyes. Dojin raised his hand with the torch, and the air above the square trembled. Not from the wind, not from an explosion, not from the torch, from the temperature drop. A 10-meter circle around the platform warmed up by 85 degrees in a single second. Minus 64 became minus 21, became 0, became plus 21. The frost on the concrete evaporated. The ice on the platform's surface turned to water, and the water evaporated before it could freeze back. The snow around the platform melted in a ring and immediately froze into a thin, glassy film at the boundary between the two temperatures. The temperature sensors on the fighters' wrists wailed simultaneously. 12 sirens. A sharp pulsing sound. A drop. An anomaly. An alarm. The fighters raised their automatic weapons. They turned their heads. They searched for the source. Dojin turned around. The burner was still hissing on his forearm. The blue flame flickered. A man stood on the platform, 2 meters from Dojin, 2 meters from the throne, 2 meters from Yuna. A black coat, long, knee-length, hands in his pockets. His face calm, motionless, like a mask taken from a corpse and placed on someone who had long since stopped rushing. His eyes dark, not angry, not cold, empty, like the bottom of a well into which a coin had been thrown without a sound. An aura of plus 21, lifting frost from the ground within a 10-meter radius. Ice crystals broke away from the concrete and hung in the air. They spun slowly. They glistened in the spotlight, like snow in reverse, snow falling upward. Silence. Absolute. Dojin's burner had stopped hissing. The wind had died down. The sirens cut off one after another because the sensors had gone off the charts and rebooted. 62 people stared at a figure that hadn't been there a second ago, that had appeared out of nothing, out of the air, out of the void, from the place between worlds where the living never venture. 12 fighters raised their assault rifles, took aim, fingers on the trigger hooks. Drones trained their cameras, lenses focused. The entire peninsula was watching. Every enclave, every bunker, every basement with a working screen. Thousands of eyes on a single man in a black coat standing in a circle of melted frost. Dojin watched. His mouth fell open. His lower jaw dropped a centimeter. The scar above his eyebrow turned white. That very one. The one he got when Young-ho shielded him with his own body. The blood drained from his face. His eyes widened. His pupils narrowed to slits. He recognized him. Not immediately. Not until the 3rd second. Because the face had changed. Because the man standing before him looked like Young-ho, but not like the Young-ho he had locked behind that door 71 days ago. That one was broader, younger, with the soft mouth and tired eyes of a sergeant who trusts his commander. This one was already sharper, drier, with a face that had lost all softness, leaving only bone and skin and a gaze. Dojin said his name, quietly, like an exhalation, like the last breath from a punctured tire. Young-ho. Then louder. Young-ho! He asked how. His voice broke in the middle of the word. He asked why he was alive. Young-ho didn't look at him, didn't turn his head, didn't blink. He was looking at Yuna. Yuna was kneeling 1.5 meters away from him, a collar, a chain, her hands on her guff. He looked at her for 3 seconds. She raised her head, slowly, as if her neck had forgotten how to move. She saw him. Her eyes widened. Her pupils darted left and right across his face, searching, scanning. Her lips trembled. Her lower lip moved first. She recognized him. Not right away, in the second, when she saw how he was standing, hands in his pockets, weight on his left leg, his right shoulder slightly lower than his left. Just like always, like on the parade ground, like in the barracks, like when he stood next to her and waited for her to finish talking on the phone with her mother. She didn't recognize his face. She recognized his body. Young-ho didn't say a word to her. He looked at her for 3 seconds. Then he turned away, smoothly, without a jerk, like a man who closed a page and turned it over. He looked at Dojin. Dojin activated the torch. Reflex. Fear triggered his hand, and his hand triggered the burner. He raised his right forearm, 2,000 degrees. A blue flame shot toward Young-ho. The distance was 2 meters. The flame should have engulfed him in 1/4 second. Young-ho touched the shadow of the exo-armor. A single gesture. His right hand came out of the palm forward, fingers spread, as if hailing a taxi. The exo-armor vanished, all of it, entirely, in the blink of an eye. Exoskeleton, servo motors, armor plates, thermonuclear core, reactor, burner, cables, mounts, speaker, visor. 80 kilograms of steel and titanium and technology worth 3,000 liters of diesel, dissolved into thin air. Didn't explode, didn't fall, didn't break, disappeared, as if someone had erased the word with an eraser, as if they had never existed. The burner went out because the burner was gone. The blue flame cut off. Dojin stood in his underwear, a thin gray t-shirt, boxers, bare feet on concrete at -64 degrees, in front of 62 people, in front of the cameras of 6 drones, in front of the entire peninsula, mouth open, arms hanging limply, the right one still raised in a gesture guiding a burner that isn't there, fingers clutching at air, no armor, no burner, no reactor, nothing. A naked man in the cold. The one who a second ago was the god of the B-17 bunker with 12 megajoules on his back. Now, a shivering body in his underwear on camera. Someone in the crowd gasped. A woman's voice, short, as if the air had been knocked out of his lungs. Someone laughed, nervously, hysterically. A man in the second row. He covered his mouth with his hand. It didn't help. The laughter seeped through his fingers. Not cheerful, terrifying. The laughter of a man who had been afraid for 2 months and suddenly saw the object of his fear standing in his underwear with his mouth open. Jisoo behind the podium turned pale. His smile cracked. It fell from his face like plaster from a ceiling. He backed up, stepped on a fighter's foot. The fighter shoved him away. Jisoo fell to his knees. One of the White Ash fighters fired, without waiting for a command. A burst from an automatic rifle, 5.45 caliber, 6 bullets in 1.5 seconds. The bullets entered Young-ho's translucent body and exited on the other side. Without slowing down, without veering off course, they passed through him as if through smoke. They struck the concrete wall behind him. 6 chips, 6 clouds of dust. Young-ho didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He stood there, hands in his pockets. His left hand went back into his pocket. The second fighter fired. The third. Bursts of fire. The thunder of automatic weapons. Bullets passed through him and went into the walls and the concrete and into the air beyond the square. Young-ho stood like a pillar of smoke through which children are shooting water guns. The shooting stopped. Silence. The magazines aren't empty. Fingers were taken off the triggers because it was pointless, because the bullets weren't working, because the man in front of them wasn't a man, but something from which the bullets came out at the same speed they went in. Young-ho raised both hands, slowly, took them out of his pockets, opened his palms, 10 fingers pointing down, toward the ground, toward the shadow, toward the enormous infrared shadow of Bunker B-17, which lay at his feet like a sleeping beast. And he touched it. Bunker B-17. All of it. Entirely. Walls a meter thick. Ceiling slabs. Floors. 4 underground levels. Generators. Pedal-powered dynamos. Beds. Blankets. Clothing. Pots. Buckets. Food supplies. Water supplies. Fuel supplies, ventilation pipes, electrical wiring, lamps, doors, locks, and people. 62 civilians, men, women, children, old people, Yuna's parents, a 65-year-old man and a 62-year-old woman who cost Yuna her conscience, a 3-year-old girl who is now 3.5, the very one, who slipped a cinnamon lollipop into his pocket with her warm little fingers and said, "For saving me." 12 white ash fighters in thermal suits with automatic rifles. That's all. 12,000 tons of concrete, flesh, and breath. One touch. The bunker vanished. It didn't collapse. It didn't explode. It didn't cave in, and it vanished. Like exo-armor. Like a truck at a gas station 68 days ago. Like a lighter on the first day. Only the scale was different. The area in front of the bunker turned into a pit. The entrance was gone because the walls containing the entrance had ceased to exist. The underground levels were laid bare like an open wound in the frozen earth. 4 floors down. Empty. Bare. The walls were cut perfectly straight, as if a giant surgeon had cut the bunker out of the Earth's body with a scalpel and carried it away. Icy air poured into the pit. Minus 64 degrees filled the space where people had been living just a second ago. Pipes sticking out of the cut walls instantly frosted over. Wires hanging from the ceiling cuts froze and became as brittle as glass. 400. No. Numbers, exact, 62 civilians, 12 fighters, Yuna's parents, a 3-year-old girl. Everyone ended up in the border. Everyone except 2. Young-ho left Dojin and Gisu on the platform. The platform stood alone. It wasn't part of the bunker. Concrete blocks on the ground, not in the ground. The platform remained. 2 men in their underwear on a concrete platform at minus 64 degrees, under 6 drones, on camera, for the entire peninsula. The blow came. Pain. Not in his temple, not in his head, everywhere, in every cell of a body that isn't there, in every single centimeter of the boundary that exists. 75 souls at once. 75 pieces of his consciousness leased out in a single second, as if 75 pages had been torn from the book of his memory all at once. Not lost. Taken. The tenants moved in as a crowd. Young-ho fell to one knee, his right, on the concrete platform. Blood from his nose. Hot. Scarlet. Brighter than it should be. From his ears. Warm. It trickled down his neck under the collar of his coat. From his eyes, red tears, bloody, red on white frost, red on gray concrete, red on a black coat. A noise in his head, not a ringing. Voices, 75 voices at once, screams, whispers, crying, prayers. Everyone he had let in was speaking inside him, all at once. Names got mixed up. Faces blurred together. He saw an old man. No, it's an old woman. No, it's a child. No, he forgot. For a split second, he forgot his own name. A void. Black. Deep. Like a bottomless well. Then a voice. Familiar. Quiet. Si-hyun. Inside the boundary, the boy spoke his name. Not aloud, in his mind, but Young-ho heard it, because Si-hyun was the first resident, because his voice rang out louder than the rest, because he was an anchor within an anchor. Choi Young-ho, 28 years old, sergeant in the engineering corps, dead for 71 days. He remembered. He remembered everything. The names returned to their places. The faces separated. The void closed. Young-ho stood up, slowly. Blood ran down his face in 3 streams. From his nose, from his left eye, from his right ear. He didn't wipe it away. He looked at Dojin. Dojin was standing on a platform 3 meters away from him, shaking, his whole body, non-stop, a violent tremor. Not from the cold, though the cold was killing him with every passing second. The skin on his bare arms had turned white. The skin on his feet had turned black. 2nd-degree frostbite in 30 seconds. He was shaking from what he had seen. The bunker was gone. His bunker. His people, his throne, his walls, his power, everything was gone. The wall that was no more, the ceiling that was no more, the generator that was no more. 62 people who were no more. And standing before him was a dead man with blood on his face and an aura of warmth in which frost rose upward like white moths. The dead man whom he had locked behind the door 71 days ago, and to whom he had said, "Sorry, math brother." 400 kilometers to the south, in the bunker of the Azure Salt Clan, Sun Hwa-yun sat in front of a screen watching the drone feed. The screen was large, military grade, high resolution. She could see every drop of blood on Young-ho's face. She saw the frost rising. She saw the empty pit where the bunker had been a second ago. Her scanner was operating remotely, via satellite. The last operational satellite in orbit that the Azure Salt Clan had leased from the defunct government for 600 liters of aviation kerosene a month. The scanner detected a thermal anomaly from orbit and converted it into numbers. The number on the screen jumped. Hwa-yun blinked. She refreshed the readings. She pressed the rescan button. The number remained. She refreshed again. It remained. Then she dropped the tablet. Her fingers unclenched on their own. Not from shock, from the fact that her brain refused to hold an object that showed the impossible. The tablet fell onto the concrete floor. The screen cracked. A diagonal crack from corner to corner. But the number remained visible. Green. Bright. On the cracked screen. UYA 47. Hwa-yun dropped to her knees. She picked up the tablet with trembling hands. Her fingers wouldn't obey her. Her right hand was shaking so much that she pressed the tablet to her chest and held it with both hands. She wrote a single sentence in her report. Her handwriting was shaky. The letters were crooked. The object had engulfed a 12,000-ton structure with 75 living people in a single touch. Then she put a period. The pen pierced the paper. On the platform, Young-ho approached Yoon-ah. 2 steps. She was sitting on her knees. The collar. A steel band around her throat. A chain chained to the armrest of the throne that now stood in the border. The chain snapped during the absorption. A link burst. A stump of the chain hung from the collar. Yuna remained on the platform when the bunker disappeared because the platform was not part of the bunker. She didn't disappear. She remained. On the concrete. On her knees. In the collar. With a scrap of chain. And she looked up at him from below. Young-ho bent down. Slowly. Not quickly. Every centimeter of his approach toward her was deliberate. He reached for the collar. His fingers rested on the steel strip. He touched the shadow of the metal. The collar vanished. The steel band dissolved. The chain fell onto the concrete with a short clang. Yuna's neck was free. A red mark from the collar. A strip 3 fingers wide, rubbed raw, inflamed. 71 days. Yuna was free. She sat on the concrete, knees on the stone, hands on her knees, her neck free. And she looked at him, from the bottom up, 3 seconds. Her eyes were wet, not from tears, from the wind, or from tears. 5 seconds. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. 7 seconds. She whispered his name. Young-ho. 1 word, 2 syllables, in that voice she used only for him, with a suffix, with tenderness, with what he had cherished more than life itself 71 days ago. He didn't answer. He straightened up, turned around, walked away, toward Dojin. Dojin was standing at the edge of the platform. His skin was turning blue. It wasn't turning white. It had passed the white stage and turned blue. The fingers on his hands were curled. The toes on his feet were no longer moving. His teeth were chattering so loudly that the drones picked up the sound.
3 minutes in the cold in his underwear. 7 more and he'll lose consciousness. 20 more and his heart would stop. Jisoo was nearby, on his knees. He couldn't stand. His legs had given out. He whimpered, thinly, high-pitched, like a puppy that had been hit. His face was wet. Tears froze on his cheeks in white trails. Young-ho approached Dojin. He stood a meter away. Dojin looked up. His eyes were cloudy, frostbitten, but alive. He saw. He understood. Young-ho spoke. He said that Dojin had promised him math 71 days ago, through the intercom, in a voice he'd taken for his brothers. 18 spots, 18 people, sorry, math. Here's his math. 1 spot for 1 traitor, inside. He touched Dojin's shadow. The fingers of his right hand passed through the infrared outline of his body. Dojin vanished, not into death, into the border, into a cell, right at the edge. 4 walls, 4 by 4 meters, ceiling 240, concrete, steel, 1 lamp, 1 chair, temperature 21 degrees, like everywhere in the border, warm, not cold. It doesn't hurt. But time. Time is 10 to 1. Every hour outside is 10 hours inside the cell. Every day is 10 days. Every week is 10 weeks. Every month is 10 months. Dojin will sit on the chair and stare at the lamp and count the seconds. Every second. Each of the 10 seconds for everyone outside. Forever. In the warmth. In the silence. In solitude. Alone with mathematics. Then Young-ho looked at Gisu. Gisu was whimpering and crawling across the concrete platform. His fingernails scraped against the stone. He wasn't trying to run. His legs wouldn't work. He was just crawling. Somewhere, away from Young-ho. Young-ho leaned toward him. Gisu rolled onto his back. He lifted his face. Wet, red, frozen tears. Snot had frozen into streaks under his nose. His mouth was open. His teeth were chattering. Young-ho asked quietly, "Did he remember?" Gisu blinked. Young-ho asked if he remembered his laughter, that very one, thin and wet, through the intercom, 71 days ago. Did he remember the word hero? Did he remember how he said, "Die beautifully"? Does he remember the frequency at which he laughed? Gisu howled. He opened his mouth and let out a sound that made one of the drones jerk to the side because the microphone picked up the resonance. Young-ho touched his shadow. Gisu vanished. Into the same cell, 4 by 4, with Dojin, with the lamp, with the chair, with time 10 to 1. Let them sit together. Let Dojin listen to Jisu's laughter from the inside, just as Young-ho listened to it from the outside. Only without end. Young-ho straightened up. The platform is empty. The chain on the concrete. The throne in the border. No bunker. No Dojin. No Jisu. Drones overhead. 6 red lights. Cameras. The whole peninsula is watching. He stood alone at -64 in a black coat with blood on his face. 3 streaks. Nose. Eye. Ear.
Blood froze on his chin and turned into red crystals. An aura of plus 21 raised frost 15 meters around him. White ice moths, slowly, beautifully, terrifyingly. In the border, Jeon Saron was receiving people. 75 people appeared at once. At different points in the residential sector, someone fell, someone screamed, someone lost consciousness. Panic, chaos, voices, crying. Children screamed. Adults screamed louder. The elderly were silent because they didn't understand. Jeong Sa-ran stood in the center of the sector with a notebook in her hand and gave orders. A surgeon's voice, steady, steely, like a scalpel. Over here. Sit down. Breathe. Water. A blanket. Don't touch that. Stay here. Si-hyun was working. The boy darted between people. Water. Blankets, a voice, calm, gentle. A 16-year-old boy was calming grown adults as if he'd been doing it his whole life. Because 3 weeks alone in an icy hell had taught him what no school could ever teach. How to be there for someone who doesn't understand what's happening. Taram stood with his rifle at the entrance to the residential sector and said nothing. Back straight, face stony. The rifle was pointed downward, but his finger was near the trigger guard. Not on it, near it. No one touched it. 12 white ash fighters also found themselves in the border, without assault rifles. Young-ho had taken the weapons during the absorption and tossed them separately into the armory. They stood in thermal suits, unarmed, watching the sniper with the assault rifle at the entrance, and understood that it wasn't worth moving. Little Bo ran between people and nuzzled his nose into their hands, into their knees, into their palms, to everyone, indiscriminately. A warm nose, a soft tongue, a wagging tail. A little red-haired dog in a world of warm light who told everyone the same thing. You're alive. Everything's fine. I'm here. A 3.5-year-old girl stood at her mother's feet and cried. Then she saw the dog. She fell silent. She reached out. Her little fingers touched the red fur. Little Bo licked her hand. The girl stopped crying. She laughed. Briefly. Once. The first laugh in the border from a person who didn't know where he was. Yuna stood in the square, alone, on the platform, in a thin jacket, without a collar, with a collar mark on her neck. She looked at Yun-ho's back, at his black coat, at the hands he'd tucked back into his pockets. He didn't look back. The sky split open, not a metaphor, literally. Not lightning, not a crack in the clouds. The air parted, like fabric being pulled at the edges. Like a wound that opens not from a blow, but from pressure from within. The edges of the fissure glowed. White, warm light. Impossible. Light at -64. Light that doesn't exist in a world where the sun is a dim red disk on the horizon. Warm air gushed from the fissure. 21 degrees above zero. Just like Yun-ho's aura, but stronger, denser, heavier. A figure descended from the fissure, slowly, as if walking down a staircase that wasn't there, step by step, step by step. Boots, white, clean, no frost. Pants, white. Jacket, white. No thermal suit, no armor, no weapons. Just a white suit like someone going to a wedding in a world where weddings still existed. An old man. Face. 71 years old but looks 50. Smooth skin. Wrinkles only around the eyes. Eyes. Black. Calm. Warm. The eyes of a man who had waited a very long time and had finally waited it out. A mark on his forehead. A hexagon. Glowing. Brightly. Brighter than the one on Yun-ho's shoulder blade. Blue light streamed from his forehead like a lantern and fell in a cone onto the concrete in front of him. Elder Yoon-Gyung-chol, 71 years old, a former physicist, head of the White Ash Clan, owner of 3 thermal power plants, a man who had been searching for the gatekeeper for 20 years. Levitating, his feet 15 centimeters off the ground, not touching it. Hovering. The air beneath his soles trembles from the heat emanating not from a reactor, but from himself. Core temperature, 42 degrees. No equipment, no suit. Just a body. An anomaly. Behind him in the fissure, a silhouette. Another one, young, just over 20, thin, tall, his face in shadow. But on his shoulder blade, light shone through the white fabric of his shirt. Blue, hexagonal. Another seal, another gatekeeper. The second. Young-ho looked at Young-chol. Young-chol looked at Young-ho. 2 people with identical marks, one on the platform covered in blood, the other in the air dressed in white. 15 meters of icy air between them. The old man smiled, gently, warmly, the way fathers smile. The way the father Young-ho hadn't had since he was 4 would have smiled. He spread his arms, wide, as if for a hug. He said his son was finally home. His voice was quiet, steady, but audible. Every word carried across 15 meters of frost without distortion, as if the air parted before his voice just as it parted before his body. He said they needed to talk, about who the border really belonged to. Young-ho stood motionless. The blood on his face had dried. The 3 streaks had turned into 3 red stripes, the battle paint of a dead man. Hands in his pockets, his left foot slightly forward, his right shoulder slightly lower than his left, as always. He looked at the number that only he could see, hanging in the air before his face like a finger pointing at the ceiling. UYA47. Then he looked at Young-chol, and he felt it. He didn't see it. He felt it, not with his eyes, with his whole body, with his entire boundary, like pressure on his chest, on his ribs, on his lungs that weren't breathing. A wave emanated from the old man, heavy, dense, slow. A wave that crushed the air and the ice and the concrete and the very fabric of space between worlds. Yoon-gyung-chol's anchor level, 89. UYA89. Almost twice as high. General Han Min-sok stood in the Southern Army bunker, 70 kilometers southeast of Incheon. The bunker was old, a Soviet-era structure, 2-meter-thick walls, a fuel oil generator, 37 personnel. The last legitimate military commander of the Southern Army. Nominal. Without an army. No orders. No communication with a government that no longer existed. He stood in front of a screen showing a live feed from drones and watched. He saw a man in a black coat appear on the platform. He saw the exo armor vanish. He saw the bunker vanish. He saw blood on the face. He saw the aura. He saw the frost. And he recognized him. Not the face, the stance. Hands in his pockets. Left foot forward. Right shoulder lower. General Han Min-sok had seen that stance on the parade ground 4 years ago, when Sergeant Choi Young-ho of the Engineer Corps stood at attention and listened to his orders. Silently, hands at his sides, but with the same slant of the shoulder, with the same weight on his left leg. The general recognized his soldier, recognized the dead man. The general slowly rose from his chair, straightened up, squared his shoulders. 59 years old, back straight, chin up. He stood at attention, in front of the screen, in front of empty air, in front of the dead man standing 70 kilometers away. The aide behind him saw it, looked at the general, looked at the screen, looked at the general again, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. The screen went dark. The drones lost the signal. A rift in the sky had emitted an electromagnetic pulse that burned out the onboard systems of all 6 machines. The drones fell onto the ice beyond the square's perimeter. 6 dull thuds. The cameras are dead. The broadcast cut off. The last frame the peninsula saw. 2 people in the square, one in black with blood on his face, the other in white, suspended in the air, 15 meters between them, and light, lots of light, where there can be no light. 2 remained in the square, Young-ho with UYA-47, Kyung-chol with UYA-89, and is an invisible line between them, thin, like a thread, like a seam between worlds, a line that will determine who gets the space between life and death, warm, endless, the only place on the dead, frozen earth where one can breathe without pain. Young-ho took his hands out of his pockets, slowly, left, right. He clenched his fists. His knuckles turned white. The hexagon on his shoulder blade flashed, bright, brighter than ever. Blue light pierced the fabric of his coat and fell in a patch on the concrete behind him. Young-ho's shadow turned blue, not black, blue, glowing. He didn't know who this old man was. He didn't know why the man had called him his son. He didn't know why a second gatekeeper was needed behind him. He didn't know what the Bianjing project was. He didn't know his father was alive. He didn't know that the ice apocalypse wasn't a natural disaster, but a planned event. He didn't know that a spy was sleeping among his residents, waiting for a signal. He knew nothing. But he knew one thing. The border was his body, his home, his world. 14 residents who had become 89. A boy with phenomenal hearing who saved him from falling into the void. A pregnant surgeon who records every beat of his non-existent pulse. A sniper deserter who scratches the corgi behind the ear and pretends he doesn't care. A corgi named Little Bo who doesn't know the world is dying and licks everyone's hands. And a 3-year-old girl who once gave him a cinnamon lollipop for saving her. No one will take his home away. Not the old man with UYA-89. Not the second gatekeeper. Not the clan. Not the ice. Not the cold. Not mathematics. No one. Young-ho took a step forward. One step. The concrete beneath his foot cracked. Not from his weight. From the pressure of the boundary bursting outward through its host. Kyung-chol lowered his hands, stopped smiling, tilted his head, looked at the crack in the concrete, then at Young-ho. And something flashed in the old man's eyes that hadn't been there a second ago. Not fear, interest. The list is not closed. Old names have been crossed out, new ones added. The count continues.